Hello, everybody. We're going to get this meeting to order. Thank you all for being here today. We're going to have the clerk take roll.
Commissioner Bauer,
Here.
Commissioner McKeerling,
Here.
Commissioner Rackison,
Here.
Commissioner Wisman,
Here.
Vice Mayor Cater Thompson, absent. And Chair Hooper,
Here.
we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the rest of our business tonight, we're going to have a brief moment of silence. Commissioner Kevin Kelly passed away very recently. We were informed over the weekend. He was one of our newest commissioners, but already in his first meeting, he had shown himself to have a great impact on the commission and the knowledge that he had. His career as an architect had taken him all over the world, most notably to Saudi Arabia of all places. And he'd also served the US government for a long time as an architect and really embodied the things happen. And really embodied the idea that public service takes all types and all talents, and he certainly found a way to make his talent benefit both our country and our city. We are going to miss him a great deal, and we will have a moment of silence now. Now our next item, which is going to seem potentially a little ghoulish given what who we've lost, but we did already receive some questions about how we were going to handle the vacancy that we now have. So I am going to ask our Assistant City Attorney to cover that process for us.
Sure. So I did speak with the city clerk today. The position is not currently open. How the clerk's office typically handles recruitments is they do it once a year unless there's a need, like we need additional members for a quorum. Whether or not to open, and we typically open the recruitments in December. Whether or not to open the recruitment will be a city manager decision. So it's not currently open, and we will let the commission and the public know when that recruitment is open. And happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you very much. And with that, we are going to move on to general public comment. During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the HCPC's subject matter jurisdiction and are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited to up to 3 minutes per person, depending on the number of persons wishing to address the commission. Time will be allocated in equal shares, totaling no more than 15 minutes. So I will open public comment now and ask speakers to bring their cards to the clerk's desk. We already have a few. I just want to ask the clerk if we've received any public comments prior to the meeting.
We received no general public comments prior to the meeting.
Thank you very much. And now I'll call Richard Brand.
Good evening, Richard Braun. 2 weeks ago, I wrote an email to the chairman of the Planning Commission asking for help understanding where the zoning overlay and hotel construction should in the flow of planning. The municipal code provides for 8 different planning tracks, but like myself, the public has no idea of the difference among those tracks. We do not even know the schedule of what is coming toward us. At the hotel zoning overlay meeting, I felt like a zombie know-nothing decoration for something called public process. I cannot be the only one lost in the planning process. Code 2.08 020 is just one of 1,829 individual ordinance titles with 250 title mentions of the word planning. Petaluma.org lists 6 applicable ordinances. I chose the most recent, and the municipal code has not been updated, and neither does the code include some of the recent state modifications. How does the commission organize its work? And let's be clear, we residents will end up holding the bag for whatever the planning products dictate. I have not been able to identify a template or critical path the commission was or is on, or even if it uses that tool. This is not allowing us to enter this information in our individual schedules. Do the products tell me anything about how they came into being? Well, let's start with a document titled Policy Planning Documents. It starts with, to help create the kind of community in which we live, we have to start with a vision. The general plan is the quote-unquote constitution. Wonderful words. But the zoning overlay is all about change, not about stability. Even if it uses the words like preservation, it's about change. Using the right time of year or by limiting applicable general plan aspects, as has been done with the proposed zoning overlay, and a zoning overlay completely circumvent the supposed constitution while having the appearance of all the boxes being checked. Commercial development is a for-profit operation. But for us, the residents, city planning meetings use up our time, our money, and we get no profits, but instead we get headaches like traffic. So it seems that the stability of the general plan may be a mirage because so many commission meetings appear to be about eliminating some aspect of the general plan guaranteed stability. Now, the agenda for today is an example of what I've been referring to. It's just a notice of a public hearing, a single notice, a single point in time. You get the staff input, we do not. So what path are we on? What is the schedule? How do we update ourselves? And where are we in the planning overlay schedule?
Thank you very much, Richard. And next we have Dave Alden.
Good evening. I just wanted to alert you this evening to a couple of upcoming meetings. Tomorrow night, these are Urban Chat meetings. Tomorrow night, Know Before You Grow will host a forum on parking reform, which I know is a topic this commission has weighed in on before. We were lucky enough to secure the attention of Tony Jordan, the founder and president of the Parking Reform Network, a Portland nonprofit with a national effort to reduce parking minimums, change parking management, et cetera, and they've been quite successful at it. Tony was recommended to me by Donald Shoup, who is the emeritus professor of UCLA and the leading parking analyst in the country. We could only get Tony here by video, but we are going to gather at the Kavanaugh Center at 7 o'clock to listen to him, engage in Q&A, et cetera. I hope all of you can join us. And then, at the end of September, Urban Chat is hosting 2 showings of the Better Cities Film Festival. We're assembling a 90-minute reel of short urban films on the best aspects of urban planning as we think they pertain to Petaluma. September 20th at the Boulevard Cinemas, and then September 28th at the SRJC Petaluma campus. In both cases, we're asking people to arrive at 5 o'clock if possible for pre-conversations. The showing will be 6 o'clock, and then hopefully we can share observations afterwards. If you go to urbanchat.org, the event tab, you'll find something for the festival, including where to buy tickets through Eventbrite. Hope to see all of you at one or more of these events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Do we have any other public comments before I close it out? All right. With that, I will close public comment and move on to approval of the minutes. I just want to invite any commissioners who have edits or amendments. Okay.
Just a question. The minutes are absent of any information to approve, so I don't know what the game is, because we're approving minutes that have no record of any information, and I guess we refer to the video to get any information. So why aren't we approving the video? I'm not sure. This doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I'll say this, it's fair to note that our minutes could be more robust. Apologies. One issue we had, and I'm sure it'll be no surprise given the age of the structure, 2 of the speakers in the back went out. So a lot of what we say in the mic is going to come out a little muffled in the back, unfortunately. What I was going to say is that I think there's no doubt that we have an issue with how our minutes work. I think asking people to just watch the recording is problematic. We do need to have a discussion about that in the long term for the framework. I would ask staff to look into options for that, if only because right now we're getting action minutes that don't really provide a lot of context.
And just from staff, have any other committees or commissions moved to the kind of video style action minute format?
Yeah, yeah, that is something that we will address with the clerks, and I believe currently are. There's requirements in both the city council rules and procedures as well as the planning commission rules that requires action minutes. And if you look at the city council minutes, they are action minutes. And the goal is sort of to be uniform between all of the committees. So I do think that is something that we will address with the interim clerk, is to make sure that all of the committees are uniform and just have the same procedures, so there's no confusion.
Well, with that in mind, do we have agreement to approve the minutes that we do have for now? Could we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner McKeerling,
Yes.
Commissioner Rackison,
Yes.
Commissioner Wisman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Cater Thompson, absent. Chair Hooper,
Yes.
minutes are approved.
Okay, with minutes approved, we will now move on to item number 2, which is our public hearing. This public hearing is a recommendation that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing and consider a recommendation to approve site plan and architectural review for the demolition of an existing 9,040 square foot restaurant building and the construction of a new 5,112 square foot restaurant building and a new 4,500 square foot commercial retail building, facade improvements to 2 existing retail buildings, and associated site improvements at the commercial retail campus located at 5002 Petaluma Boulevard North, and to consider a recommendation to approve a site plan and architectural review for a master plan program for the proposed redeveloped commercial retail campus located at 5002 Petaluma Boulevard North. With that, I'd like to ask if any commissioners want to disclose ex parte communications. All right. We will now receive staff and applicant presentations. This will give our commission the opportunity to ask staff and the applicant about what is taking place in this project and how we might want to proceed. This will also be an opportunity for the public to provide comment. The commission following public comments, so we'll do presentations, questions from commissioners, then we'll do public comment. Following public comment, the commission will consider the site development SPAR and the master sign program SPAR separately. And we're doing that separately so we can have 2 separate votes, 2 separate discussions. So with that in mind, I want to invite staff, and in this case, Mike, our senior planner, to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hooper. I'll go ahead and broadcast my presentation. Okay, looks like it's up there. So, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mike Janusek. I'm a senior planner with the City of Petaluma. And tonight I'll be presenting the staff report for the site plan and architectural review with a master sign program for 5002 Petaluma Boulevard North Retail Campus. and this is file number PLSR 2022-0039. So an overview of my presentation this evening. I'll give some project context and background, go over a project description, and again, this is for both a SPAR and an MSP, so it'll be 2 rounds of project description. I'll run through public comments received to date, go through standards of review and findings to the applicable review criteria, and then I'll offer staff's recommendation. So the project site is approximately 3 acres. It's bound by, if you're following my cursor, it's bound by Highway 101 to the northeast, Petaluma Boulevard north to the west-northwest, Auto Center Drive to the south, and then it's also bordered to the more or less due south by the car dealerships that are within the Auto Center Planned Community District. You can see the outline of the parcel in red. It's in a regular lot shape. And while it doesn't meet the definition of a flag lot in the zoning code, it functions as a flag lot. You'll see there's a roughly 30-foot wide drive aisle in this portion of the lot with access to Auto Center Drive, and that's about 180 feet in depth before you get to the remainder of the site development. Here's a look at from the street view of that frontage along Auto Center Drive, and you can see the existing development beyond in the background, and then a look down the drive aisle. Here's a look, sort of a perspective angle, looking toward the condition at the frontage of Petaluma Boulevard North, and you can see there's about a 1-story height differential between the site and the public road as Petaluma Boulevard North raises as it approaches the overpass. The project is in the general plan. The land use designation is community commercial. There's no residential land use districts in the vicinity. The zoning is the C2 commercial 2 zoning district, which implements the community commercial land use. And the use is by right in this district. So to be clear, retail less than 25,000 square feet and restaurants, provided they don't have a drive-through, which is prohibited by our general plan policies, those are uses that are allowed by right, and those are existing and proposed uses. And then to further that point, we don't have a retail ordinance per se, or general plan policies that regulate specific tenancies, nor do they more generally regulate what's known as formula retail or chains. Oh, I had some more to go on that slide. So you'll also see this blue hatching, and that corresponds to the 100-year floodplain map by FEMA. And so that means that there's an applicable overlay, the floodplain combining district overlay. And so the site is subject to floodplain regulations in Chapter 6. And just because a portion of the site is in the floodplain, it means the entire, it's across the site. Site-wide is subject to Chapter 6. And I also want to make a point that while development in the floodway is prohibited in Petaluma, development in the floodplain is regulated by Chapter 6. So the items before you this evening are the site plan and architectural review, and that's in draft resolution A, and that's for the site plan, the building elevations, the site improvements. And then there's also, and that's required by section IZO section 24050 as a major non-residential development, new development. and that requires the Planning Commission review as a major SPAR. Then there's also Attachment B, which is a draft resolution to consider an MSP, a Master Sign Program, which pursuant to ISO section 20020Q follows the same SPAR process and review body. So it uses SPAR review criteria, and it's under the review authority of the Planning Commission. So I'll start with the site development, and that's the SPAR. And so the proposal is to demolish the existing restaurant building, construct a new restaurant building, construct a new retail building, 2 facade improvements of 2 existing retail buildings, and site improvements that include parking lot improvements, landscape improvements, and stormwater management improvements. So diagrammatically, you've got the 2 existing retail buildings would get storefront improvements, and then there'd be a newly sited and constructed retail building referred to as Retail Building 3 in the packet in the proposal. And then you can see the footprint of the existing restaurant building. That's approximately 9,000 square feet. That would be effectively replaced by a new roughly 5,000 square foot restaurant building that's sited in roughly the same footprint. And the net result of all that would be an increase in 572 net square feet of floor area, and there'd be 11 additional parking spaces as well. Combined with that, you would have 23,000 square feet of additional landscape planting area. And part of those parking lot improvements would include 32 electric vehicle stalls. There's also permeable stalls in certain parking stall rows that are located within the floodplain, and that amounts to 5,000 square feet of permeable surface area. There would be so existing, there's 170, roughly 170 parking spaces. The proposed would be 181. So that's where the net increase of 11 would come from. We don't have a parking maximum in the code, but for your reference point, the parking minimum on this site would be 62, and 181 are proposed. Again, net increase of 11 overall, and also the addition of 32 EV stalls. And then I also want, while I have the site plan up, I want to be sure I point out that the site plan complies with all C2 development standards, including setback, height, and FAR. And I'll touch on pedestrian access and circulation. So there's a pedestrian connection to the public sidewalk in Auto Center Drive, and a 4-foot access walkway is ADA requirement. They're providing 6 feet, so it exceeds the standard, and it's a continuous sidewalk that would go from the public right-of-way to provide access to the storefront and site amenities such as the bike parking as well as outdoor dining areas. Part of the presentations tonight, staff would like to add a condition of approval that those walkways, when they cross circulation areas for vehicles, the drive aisles and the parking lot areas, you see they're striped. The condition would add that there's also contrasting material provided as well to promote safety and enhance visibility. Here's site architecture. So look at the elevations of Retail Building 3 and the restaurant building. The new buildings are complementary and they integrate the building design across the site. So there's a blend of contemporary and farmhouse architectural styles. This is exhibited by the vertical siding, the gable roof forms, the simple massing, and the modern finishes. And so both buildings have a light neutral color scheme with dark accents. Both have the gable roof form, vertical tower elements, the standing metal, the dark standing seam metal roof. Here's a look at the elevations of the two existing retail buildings that there's proposed facade improvements for. You'll see they'll also match and mirror the new buildings in the finishes. They'll be painted the same color to match. And retail building 1, prominently, there's a new parapet proposed that would screen existing rooftop screening, or excuse me, that would screen existing roof-mounted equipment, mechanical equipment. And then there's a reconfigured exterior staircase, expanded storefront system, also expanded storefront system on retail building 2. Landscape plan, I mentioned the square footage and the outdoor dining and patios and the permeable pavement areas already, but I'd like to point out the project would provide 93 new trees on site, 32 of which would be native California species. The most prevalent species is the western redbud. And existing on the site, there are 4 trees. 3 would be removed, the plum, the yucca, and the eucalyptus. And then there's a multi-trunk elm that would be retained. None of those trees are protected by Chapter 17, but there is a condition of approval that would require our standard tree protection notes consistent with Chapter 17 for the elm. The storm plan. The project proposes 3 storm control methods. There's self-retaining, bioretention, and underground detention. Self-retaining would be landscaped areas that would allow for infiltration. The bioretention, also known as LID, there was 2 areas located on the side of the restaurant building. And then there's also underground detention. Roof areas would be drained to either self-retaining or LID facilities. These are sized to meet Bay Area Stormwater Management Agencies Association requirements, or BASMA. And then the underground chamber is above and beyond city and regional requirements and is intended to provide additional basin capacity for the benefit of downstream properties within the floodplain. In addition, the project was reviewed by both the city engineer and the floodplain administrator and demonstrated compliance with both the zero net fill requirement as well as would be required to provide at the during the building permit phase, would be required to provide pad elevation certificates that demonstrate the building pads would be 2 feet above base flood elevation. Now I'll move to the scope of work under the sign program. It includes freestanding signage as well as wall signs. The freestanding signage, there's a new multi-tenant pylon sign on the right-hand side of the screen that is 13 feet tall roughly and 71 square feet in area. The sign code allows for a primary shopping center freestanding sign to be up to 30 feet and 200 square feet of area. So this falls below that maximum. And there's also, in the master sign program, it shows and proposes the existing Cattleman's Monument sign as to be retained and refaced. However, the sign is non-conforming, and it's non-conforming for 2 reasons. The first is Section 20030G requires all signs are located on the same site as the use they intend to advertise. And in 2010, Auto Center Drive was extended, and the sign now is located within the public right-of-way as a result of that project. And while it was protected in place during the road project, there's no sign permit on record. So it's no longer on site and is non-conforming. The other non-conformity is that as a secondary freestanding shopping center sign, it is allowed that the maximum allowed is 25 square feet and it's 40 square feet in area. So therefore, it's non-conforming, and it would, absent a permit on file, it is required to be removed, and so the staff has conditioned it in your packet this evening for this monument sign to be removed. The wall signage proposed. The sign program proposes signage corresponding to roughly each storefront and tenant. The formula for maximum signage is ISO 20050B5. The project, the MSP complies with the maximum allotment per tenant. And there's also, a subsequent sign permit that would be required, as well as a plan check with any approved MSP before signage could be installed. And durable acrylic materials are proposed, as well as LED lighting with no exposed lighting. Here is the wall signage of the storefronts for the retail portion of the site. You'll also notice that the master sign program includes 2 freeway-oriented signs. However, these, like the monument signs, are not allowed, and staff has conditioned that the master sign program is revised prior to any sign permit submittal, and does not. The resolution would not approve them as it's currently drafted. They are freeway-oriented in that they face 101 with no building in between. That meets the definition of freeway-oriented per ISO 20020J. And then they are not allowed, Section 2140D5 does not allow for freeway-oriented signage for tenants smaller than 8,000 square feet. The Chick-fil-A would be a roughly 5,000 square foot tenant. And retail building 3, this tenant would be 1,500 square feet. I also want to speak to the compliance of 2 rear elevation signs, one for retail building 1 and the other for retail building 3. These meet these comply with the sign code. The nearest to freeway restricted is a specific standard that regulates signage to be viewed primarily from ingress and egress ramps and considers them essentially to be the same as freeway oriented. These signs are primarily to be viewed from Petaluma Boulevard North, as well as on site from the rear patio in the case of retail building 3. And so therefore, they are not primarily to be viewed from the ingress or egress ramps. It's any visibility from those locations would be incidental, and they are not considered freeway oriented. Public comment, there were 3 received and 4 issues. Drive-throughs, demolition of the existing restaurant building, flooding, and architectural style. Again, General Plan Policy 4P12 prohibits drive-throughs. A drive-through is not proposed. The restaurant building is proposed for demolition. Floodplain administrator reviewed for compliance, as I spoke to in the storm plan. And the SPAR before you this evening considers architectural style. The standards of review, Staff is able to make all required findings, and I tried to thread those into the project description and the more pertinent points so that you can understand the substantive findings in the staff report and the resolution. But I'll go ahead and summarize them. For the SPAR, new proposed buildings would blend contemporary and farmhouse materials and form, and the renovated retail buildings are painted to match. The new restaurant building would be sited in approximately the same location, and the new retail building is sited to create continuity between the existing retail and restaurant building. Landscaping is proposed in accordance with applicable city standards. 93 new trees, including 32 natives, are proposed. The pedestrian pathway would include marked crossings and would run primarily along curb parking lot landscape areas to promote safety. Again, staff would like to add a condition during the hearing tonight that also those crossings are not only striped but of a contrasting pavement material to also promote safety. I'll go ahead and summarize the MSP findings. Freestanding signage would use a neutral color base and dark aluminum accents to complement the site architecture. The proposed signage is durable and understated. The proposed pylon sign would not conflict with vision triangles at the intersection. The master sign program is also conditioned to remove the existing monument sign and revise the plans to remove the two freeway-oriented signs shown on the plans. So therefore, as conditioned, the master sign program complies with all applicable standards of the sign code, ISO Chapter 20. Environmental review, the application was subject to CEQA and is categorically exempt pursuant to Class 1 existing facilities, Class 2 replacement or reconstruction, Class 32 infill. There's a CEQA memo to justify the categorical exemption in attachment H in your packet this evening, and no exceptions to the exemption listed in section 153002 apply. And staff is able to make the findings, and it is recommended that the Planning Commission consider a resolution in attachment A to approve the SPAR for 5002 Petaluma Boulevard North Retail Campus, and that's with the added condition for contrasting pedestrian crossing material. And also the second item before you to consider a resolution to approve the master sign program subject to SPAR for 5002 Petaluma Boulevard North Retail Campus. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Before getting to the applicant, I just wanted to ask if Commission had any quick questions they wanted to ask now before getting to the applicant.
Define quick.
We will move on to the applicant's presentation, and then we will go to questions. Thank you very much, Mike.
Can you hear me? Gentlemen and lady of the Planning Commission, thank you for having us tonight, and thank you for your time considering our project. My name is Damon Porter. I'm the CEO of Dynamic Real Estate Partners and the owner of the property. We've been working on this for quite some time, coming up with hopefully what you see as a good blended revitalization of a site. I'm here with my colleagues, Kelly Harrison and Carter Crouch, as well as our development team that we've all been working together, putting together this project. Most of the people are local. We have spent a lot of time analyzing and doing. We want to refresh the property, as you can see. We want to keep the existing people, processes, the site intact, work with some new tenants that we're bringing to the site that we think are best in class and will provide a massive economic boost for the property. As staff has said, we're addressing flooding. We're adding a tremendous amount of retention on site. We're improving the flow of water. We saw what obviously happened in this last rainstorm, and we've seen that all over California, and where we can do that to improve it is what we're here to do. We're excited about our tenants and some new ones that we're looking at. I think they're going to do amazing at this property, and they're going to add a lot of economic benefit and value. Over this past year and a half of our visiting with community, talking to city officials of other tenants that they think about wanting to be here. One of them that comes to mind is cannabis. We would love to have a cannabis tenant here. We've actually had several meetings with several of them. One of them that actually came from the city as a recommendation. We actually met with them today. They've been waiting in the wings for an opportunity in Petaluma to serve you and be here. So we are open and want it to happen. The site has its challenges, as we all know. It sits below a Caltrans on-ramp that was probably 12 to 15 feet high, so it sits in kind of a bowl. It's really not present to the main boulevard in and out. You have to go around Auto Center Drive to get in. The sign program we were hoping wouldn't be amended because we spent a lot of time back and forth the last 9 months trying to get something, or at least what we could, out of it to help the whole project and all the tenants that are going to be there be successful. If people can be seen, they have more sales, they do better business. So my ask is that we leave it as we submitted it. We do have that monument sign. It was part of the property at some point. It did belong to it. It's been there forever. Unfortunately, when the dedication happened, that removed it. But, just asking for you to consider leaving it. Kelly has some thoughts and ideas as that as well. And again, thank you for your time and consideration.
Good evening, Commissioners. Nice to finally all meet you, and of course, meet Michael in person, Andrew in person. We actually had our first call with the city August 7th of 2022, so they have worked diligently with us to craft and prepare something that pleases the commission and the community. We did hit a snafu with our signage, and I think what we are, thank you. What we're asking you to do is to give further consideration on your sign code, which we don't think is particularly clear and does not address, particularly as it relates to the freeway-oriented signage in section 20.020Q. It doesn't say that freeway-oriented signage can be for a building under 8,000, or that it cannot be. It is merely omitted. So we don't think your sign code clearly addresses that, and also think that this could potentially be an issue for new businesses and new tenants that come in the future to your city. On the monument sign, as Damon, my boss, just shared with you, it has been there for decades. We don't have an exact amount. We have been in touch with Neon Pacific Signs, who is their vendor, and has been their vendor at least since '98. So they are actually going to continue doing some digging around to see if they can locate a permit. The city did try and locate a permit. I understand most of those older documents are off-site in storage, and perhaps they're in some other box there that we missed, but we would like to have the opportunity to potentially keep that if we are able to find further documentation that it is permitted. And would also like you to request that you give further consideration to our freeway-oriented signage for all the reasons that each of us have shared with you. It acts as a flag lot. We're buried. We have no street front presence. And having that monument sign where it is a good directional for customers who are wanting to come in and shop and eat there. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Is this everybody from the applicant side?
They did such a good job.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Oh, absolutely. Just wanted to make sure. With that in mind, I'm now going to ask our Assistant City Attorney to just provide some clear instructions for the commission around our discussion.
Sure. So there are, like Michael said, two entitlements tonight, a SPAR entitlement for the actual physical layout, as well as a SPAR finding for the master sign program. Also, like Michael said, the city does not have any chain restaurant or big box store ordinance. This is a permitted use. So like I said, the two entitlements are related to SPAR. Those findings, your determination needs to be related to the SPAR permit findings. That's related to the harmoniousness of the site plan and the architecture, and not whether we like the proposed tenant or we really like the old tenant better. It needs to be based on those findings in the SPAR. Those are in the resolution. They're also in our chapter 24. So that's what I'll say about that. Regarding the sign entitlements, there's kind of two existing issues, I would say. One is the freeway-oriented sign. The code, and it's not the best written ordinance, it is silent on for tenants that are less than 8,000 square feet. There is a statute of interpretation. When you exclude something from the actual ordinance, that means it was done intentionally. So how the city interprets the ordinance, because it doesn't address signs below 8,000 square feet, that it is not allowed. However, as this is a master sign program, there is some flexibility in the code if there are certain findings that the Planning Commission may make. And let me just read those findings real quick so you're aware. They're stated in the purposes section, that's IZO 20.010. The first finding is, and this is to allow some flexibility in the existing sign standards. So to allow a freeway-oriented sign, the Planning Commission will need to find, one, that the sign will protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of the city by ensuring that the number, size, type, and design of all signs in Petaluma will not detract from the attractiveness and orderliness of the city's appearance. The other finding is to protect the general welfare of the merchants and property owners in Petaluma by avoiding wasteful and costly competition among sign users, which can result from the uncontrolled use of signs. So I believe staff believes there are two modifications that we would need to, that the Planning Commission would need to find. One is for allow the freeway-oriented signs. The other is for that existing monument sign. That monument sign currently is, because we can't find a permit, it is considered a legal non-conforming use. But again, there is some flexibility to get it back into a conforming use. You would need to make those two required findings stated in 20.010. So hopefully that guides you, and we're here to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will get into commissioner questions, and I'm going to start with Rick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation and applicant for the presentation of the materials. A few questions, starting with the proposed EV chargers. Just wondering if the applicant can provide any more depth on what chargers those will be, what mix of charger types, or any more detail on those chargers.
Well, I mean, I can speak
Please come to the podium.
Thank you.
at other multifamily projects that we've worked on and retail projects. I think generally we're using a type 2 charger, but that'll be developed through the design development phase.
Okay, thank you. Somewhat related, has there been any consideration of putting solar on any carports out in the parking lot area?
Right now, we don't have any carports or covered parking on the project,
Okay.
but it's a consideration to put solar on roofs.
Okay. And in terms of the permeable surfaces in the parking spaces, how was that level of coverage decided?
Can you repeat the last part of that question, please?
It was pointed out that there's some permeable surfaces in some of the spaces, parking spaces. In terms of the total square footage, why was that number
so
chosen?
the approach was to provide permeable parking spaces within the 100-year floodplain to encourage infiltration.
Okay. Is there anything that prevents expansion of that to more spaces?
Well, yeah, there's the underground storage that's exceeding the city's requirements.
Okay.
No discussion about further expanding the parking.
Okay. That underground retention, how is that done? What is that? Is it a tank? Is it a cavern? Is it just
So-
material that absorbs water?
Yeah, so it's chambers underground that basically retain the 1-year 24-hour storm. And so it's a series of underground chambers that are below ground.
And what happens when they reach capacity?
So when they reach capacity, there is an overflow storm drain pipe that connects into the city system.
Okay. What I didn't get a good sense of from the drawings, and maybe I missed it if you could point it out, is what the bike pathway is. I saw there was discussion of pedestrian pathway, but I didn't get a good sense of any type of specific bike access or where there would be proposed bike access within the property itself.
I think the intent is that those would be multimodal. So if you
Okay.
came on a bike, or you came in on a scooter, or if you walked in, that those would all be.
Please come to the podium.
Those would be multimodal, so that if you were biking, scootering, walking, or skipping, that those would all be shared.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All the questions I have, Chair.
Oh, and as a brief aside, I know getting up to the podium's probably got to get pretty irritating after a while. The only reason we're requiring it and not just letting people shout is because we typically have a good probably half a dozen viewers on YouTube at home, and the mics are the only way they can hear as well. So thank you for your patience. And with that, Darren.
Perfect. So I'll start with the demo portion. Can you just talk about the decision to demo the existing restaurant? I'm assuming it was not feasible to reuse for a number of reasons, but just kind of give an overview of that.
Sure. The building is extremely old and has kind of used up its existing lifespan, and it's too big for the current intended use that we need for the property.
That is succinct and exactly what I was looking for. Terrific. And then I noticed in the staff report, the draft resolution, the first one, obviously not about the signage, on page 13, item 37, we kind of get into what's required for a demo permit. I'm assuming we're also requiring ACM, lead-based paint, all that standard kind of testing before demo. I'm seeing nodding heads. Fantastic. And then along with that, when it comes to the floodplain determination, no net fill, I'm assuming there was like a geotechnical report or something, or a construction narrative or that explained or helped us make that determination, explaining the any soil moving off-site coming on, that kind of thing?
That's correct. I'm going to ask Deputy Director of Operations, Public Works, Jeff Stutzman, to talk about that, because there is a certification that they're required to submit that we keep on file for FEMA records. And so if you could describe that to us, Mr. Stutzman.
Good evening. So when we talk about the 500-year and the 100-year flood, it all relates back to FEMA and our certification with FEMA and like a level that we maintain, like our certification level. So when it comes to 100-year flood within areas that are within the 100-year floodplain, we go through FEMA, we do elevation certificates, and then based on our municipal code, we're required that the finished floor of all the buildings or pads or mechanical equipment is 1 foot above the floodplain. So that's kind of what the elevation certificate is related to. And then in the municipal code also requires that it be zero net fill. And the way that they calculate that is just based on kind of a quantitative volume. So if they dug an area out for bioretention, there's some off-haul they add in for foundations and building pad, you're adding in some. So it's really just a balance that you can do on the plan. So they do have a diagram that really shows that balanced net fill of how the site looks.
Terrific. Thank you, Jeff. I
You're
appreciate that. And then it's kind of going along with that flooding question. I noticed on the 3 buildings, so obviously this is going to be a split lot where you have Chick-fil-A and then the other 3 retail, if I'm understanding that correctly. The 3 retail that I'll call the top portion just for the sake of the map, I noticed there's floodplain there, and I noticed there's actually a grade that moves kind of from, and it's hard, I'm pointing at my screen here, but there's a grade that moves from the parking lots in front of the Chick-fil-A kind of toward the top corner near one of the trash enclosures directly adjacent to that neighboring property that's kind of in the middle of your guys' site. But I noticed there weren't stormwater bioretention or downspouts or storm drains there. Can you just walk through the kind of the capacity or the outflow from that area, that top retail area, again, that I think has floodplain overlap and also looks like it has some grade flowing in that direction for water? Just the why we don't see bioretention or storm drain there as much.
Well, we were given a lot of guidance by the city engineer and the civil engineer that we are using to put the massive underground chambers where they are currently located on the plan, because that's actually in the 100-year floodplain. The actual development we're doing is outside of that floodplain, so it doesn't ever really flood there. And the 2 existing buildings are on the edge of that, and they've actually never flooded. So it was more history, common sense, and engineering and calculations and trapping the majority of that water so that it was not going to go to the rest of the site.
Okay, so from city engineering, we're not worried about that part of the site in terms of flood capacity, or I know beforehand we've been sent some photos by citizens of the site flooding and things of that nature, but we're pretty confident that where a majority of obviously the permeable with those perforated drains, and then downspouts in the storm drain system, mainly from the Chick-fil-A out, that's capturing most of this water potential on site.
I mean, the idea is that we're going to improve the existing condition tenfold. The current pictures I saw, the same pictures months ago when we had them, the majority of the flooding was really just at the entrance where there's that public storm drain that's open, is an open ditch trying to cut across and go under Petaluma Way to the river. So that's really where that backed up. So hopefully to reduce the flow from our site and trap it on there so that it doesn't end up in there is really the goal that we're trying to do. So it helps reduce what's in the main system.
Terrific. Thanks for getting in the weeds a little bit with me on that one. And then is any of the water storage reusable on site anywhere, anything of that nature? Is it kind of static and then outflow to the city system, or is any of that reusable?
No, the plan is for the stormwater to be retained to reduce the flows leaving the site and then entering into the city system.
And then for the city engineering team, I know sometimes stormwater and drainage in general, drainage capacity can be an issue. Our infrastructure in that area, we obviously, if you've approved this, we don't anticipate any issues with kind of where their system ties into ours and any volume and things of that nature?
No, we don't see any issue with that. I think by the site design that they did, they incorporated a lot of like low impact development procedures so that when you look at the site from like an existing standpoint to a proposed standpoint, they have a lot more impervious surface, a lot more bioretention areas, a lot of areas where water can drain and filter out before it enters their system. For example, all the bioretention that they have, or the swales, it's going to fill up, and when it fills up and there's no way for the water to percolate, that's when it goes to this system. So our system is going to have less water going to it from the site as it previously was today.
Okay, great. And I know bioswales are notoriously hard to kind of keep in a great condition. Was there any explorations of more capacity, especially in that big parking area in front of Chick-fil-A, for more bioretention, anything of that nature? Did we ever explore kind of more of that capacity? I know, and I hate making everyone get out of their chairs.
I'm just getting extra exercise. No, because the plan meets the city's requirements. And so we're exceeding the requirements by providing the underground detention.
Okay, fair enough. And then just moving to trees, and the arborist may not be here with us, but I notice page 14 of the staff report, we call out general plan policy 1P49, inventory and diversity of trees. I have a question mark of here. Are we there with the current tree plan? Was there thoughts about including natives? Obviously, there are some, I would love to see bigger trees that cover more area. I think crepe myrtles, strawberry trees can be kind of more decorative shrubs at times. Over a long time, crepe myrtles especially can get a nice canopy, but they also don't promote a lot of biodiversity. They're not native to our range. So did we ever look at anything like sycamores, the large acer trees? Again, I know sycamores can cause root problems with pavement. Oaks, Quercus agrifolia, anything like that. Do we kind of explore some other planting options that are more in the native range and maybe something bigger? Are you guys open to exploring that?
I'm a big fan for all the trees that you just talked about. They're my favorite. We were given guidance of the trees that we needed to stick with and use. So that was the kind of the rule book that we end up having to play with, and here's where all of this goes. And I know the site right now has 0 trees, and now we're going to have over 100. So I think hopefully we're doing a good job making it a beautiful forest that's going to be within the guidelines that the city is allowing us to do it. So.
And so if I'm understanding, the tree palette was something put forth by the planning staff, is that right?
No, that's not correct. It was proposed by the applicant team, by their landscape design team and architecture firm.
But there's a list of the available flora and fauna that we're able to use.
There's no city list. There's a city list for street trees, but not for on-site development. So the trees that you see in your packet on the landscape plan that's proposed by the development team, by their design professionals. Presumably those are trees that are suitable for the planter islands. So the width of those parking lot islands would be able to accommodate that species. Oftentimes that's a limiting factor in the palette.
Okay, and I appreciate that explanation, and I'm sure there are other members that are going to talk about that, and we'll save some of that for comments. We've already covered solar, which is fantastic. Commissioner Wisman already talked about more permeable paving. Is that possible? I guess there's just a question mark on kind of why so much parking, and if you guys explored other plans. Contextually, Petaluma is a city that's moving toward kind of less parking, more efficient utilization of sites. Parking is kind of a low-grade usage. I guess were there any other configurations that had less parking area? And I guess minimally, was there any consideration for kind of landscaped convertible parking spaces? We've seen another developer, LabCon, back earlier this summer, I believe. It seems longer than that. Did parking spaces that were basically landscaped and convertible if needed. So it was a little area for extra flora in there. So I guess that's a million questions in one, but can you talk about the decision to land on that kind of parking arrangement? And if maybe there's a more efficient utilization there that can limit or that can make better use or denser use than just parking?
I can speak about it in a more general sense, and that is, we did initially have more parking than we have now. But because we did put in the pavers, because we did expand the landscaping and the landscape fingers, we actually lost parking that our customers feel are particularly valuable, especially when there is not going to be a drive-through here. So, and as Mr. Janusik stated, we actually only have 11 more parking stalls than currently exists.
Okay, that is a good explanation. And I guess the decision for parking along the strip there that's adjacent to that other property, there's that narrow kind of entrance to your main lot. I noticed that turned into a row of parking, and you'll have to remind me, is that what that was used for before? I felt like that was mostly degraded and didn't really have a use. But that parking strip that I believe is permeable on the entrance to your guys' main lot.
That is leased to the gas station.
Okay.
So that was before our time.
Okay, that makes sense. I was like, this parking looks like it's for the gas station.
Right,
that
so
makes
it's not parking available to our site, so we actually have less parking available for us than what one would see.
Okay, understood. Thank you for that. And I guess then I have a more general couple design questions for the applicant. I'm sure, as you've probably know, Petaluma, chicken capital of the world. We're talking about Chick-fil-A. Were there design influences, inspirations you took from this area that show up in the, I mean, we know it's kind of farmhouse contemporary. Anything specific, anything that can make residents of Petaluma feel like this really hits to some element of the heart of Petaluma? Anything like that you want to share for the design piece? She's the master painter.
Yeah, sure. I think, when we were designing this building, the new buildings at least, we looked at the existing on site and want to make sure that we captured and not take away from what was there before. So, the painting and specifying, the board and batten and the materials definitely speaks to that. And giving it a refresh and, like you said, modernizing it a bit, but not taking away what was there before. And I think we did also, our design team did look at, the surrounding architecture as well, and, the big box and some of the other architectural features like awnings and things like that. So decorative pieces that goes over the windows and things like that are kept and remained, and it's on the new design as well.
An excellent summary. Thank you. And then final question here to let other commissioners weigh in. Lighting. I've been to that site at night. I mean, are we talking, and I noticed there was obviously discussion of lighting features, and that'll be something staff really gets into. Is there significantly more lighting on site than there was previously? Is it planned to operate 24 hours, or just any insights on the lighting plan?
Good evening. The lighting code requirements have changed pretty significantly since the existing site was constructed. So yeah, lighting definitely is going to look different. You've got a lot more requirements for specific foot candles for safety, and then, obviously dark sky focus and LED for energy.
Okay, great. Well, I think I officially give everyone a turn. Thank you very much.
It's very good, Commissioner Rackison. Thank you. Okay, I have a few questions. One, I think, Commissioner Rackison, you said something about the solar was talked about, but I wanted to just, I wasn't sure if we got a resolution to that. So there is going to be solar planned, or that's not in the plans right now for rooftop solar?
It is not in the plan right now.
Is this something we can condition or ask for? Because I think that we've talked about, asking for rooftop solar on new developments, and I don't know if that's made it, to code yet. I don't think it has, but we ask for it often enough that I feel like we don't want to we want to give them the opportunity to conform like the rest of the applicants that we've been talking to lately. So is this something we can ask for?
Let me think about that, and we'll circle back around as you go to your other questions.
Okay,
thank
thank you,
you.
because I think it's
Sure.
important at this stage of climate change.
Right.
To ask for that and to have that in our city where we are pretty progressive and forward-thinking in that way. So, okay, well, please do think about that. The next one I want to talk about is this curbside pickup window. I'm curious, is that something people will drive up to? I'm guessing they will walk up to it, or how does that work? All right.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ed Hale, and I'm a development consultant with Chick-fil-A. I work for a firm called 4G Development Consulting, and so I'm here to answer the operational questions like that. I also have with me the operator of our store up in Rohnert Park, so we'll be able to answer any technical questions as well. So curbside delivery is where a customer has an application on their cell phone. They order the food on the app, and then they drive to the location, they park, and then the food is brought out by a crew member to the car while they're waiting for the food. That's
Okay.
what curbside delivery is.
Okay, great, thank you. I was hoping that you would say something like that, because I wouldn't want them to be waiting in a queue to pick up their food.
Well, it's very interesting, if I could add to that. Actually, right now, the curbside delivery is actually more efficient when it comes to delivering food to a customer than drive-through. If you can imagine that when you show up at a store to buy food through a drive-through, the store doesn't know that you're there. They don't know what you're going to order. They can't begin to prepare that food order for you until you've given your order. And you've noticed that probably if you've been to a Chick-fil-A, how we've tried to extend the order point further and further back, because the idea is to get the food order processed earlier in the process, which now makes our drive-throughs more efficient. When you have curbside delivery, that food is ordered several minutes even earlier. Okay, and because of the technology that we implement, we're able to identify when that food needs to be ready, so that when they pull up, they're actually spending, on average, and this is what's happening right now at our store up at Rohnert Park, on average, a minute and 30 seconds less on the site total compared to a drive-through. So that's a
Great.
minute and 30 seconds less that they're actually on the site, sitting in their car, waiting for their food.
That's great. Okay, before you go, though, I have a question. Have you had other areas put up signs asking for no idling while they're waiting? Because I know that's the point of us not having any drive-throughs. So, not having cars idle would be a nice feature if we could have some sort of signage to indicate that, or ask for that.
Yeah, when a customer pulls up to pick up their food, if they're turning off their car in order to get their food, that means that they have an anticipation that the food's going to take a while. All right, we are operating under the notion, the idea that we're going to be efficient, and they're going to expect that food to be delivered sooner. So if we were to put up signage that said we encourage people to not idle, please turn your car off while waiting, that counts against our signage allotment on the site. And signage is a very, very tight commodity right now. So we haven't found it to be necessary. There are some studies out there that, that says that at a certain point, it actually emits more particles into the air to start and stop the car because of the efficiencies of the engine starting capacities, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to speak on the technology of that, but at a minute and 30 seconds less than when they're on a drive-through, we're already significantly improving the greenhouse gas emission and the particles that are emitted. But we are open to, if the commission would like us to, but it costs us signage area when we do that.
Okay, well, clearly you've been asked this before.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I'm seeing. Okay, well, yeah, I don't want to cost you any more signage, but is that true? Would it cost them additional signage if we were to ask them to put small signs up around the parking area?
Yes, that's correct, that it would not be, the sign code doesn't have any provision that would exempt that from a sign permit, and so therefore such signage associated with an individual tenant would count against their allotment. However, as Dylan indicated, there is also ability for the commission to provide flexibility, in a sense, offset that accounting.
Well, if we had that flexibility to not impinge upon their already slim sign allotment that they're, already having a difficult time with, I wouldn't mind having a few signs that say, please turn off your car while waiting. But I'm not going to make it a I'm not going to ask for it to be a requirement. I just think it's good common sense. But, okay. Let's see, moving along. I'm just curious about this, the ingress and the egress of the site is odd, obviously. You have to kind of come along the backwards. Why, was it at all thought that it would be like normal, and you could come in through Petaluma Boulevard North, kind of where like the on-ramp comes on? What is prohibiting that from happening? The way you come into the site, you have to kind of go around the side, don't you? I mean, you're not coming, there's no Petaluma Boulevard real entrance right into the site, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
the
how
only
come?
access point is Auto Center Drive. That's just the alignment of the roadway. I don't think the site, if you look at aerial photos of the site, it was developed, I think, around 1965, when the interstate went in. It converted from agricultural to the commercial development you see now, and it's always been sort of more or less fronting, even though we don't count freeway as frontage. It's had that on-ramp. The on-ramp design has changed over time. I think in 2007, they changed the elevation even more, probably for safety. So you have a grade differential, and there's not much interface with Petaluma Boulevard North, even though it is a frontage. It's kind of a disengaged frontage.
It's the grade differential that is preventing that?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, I get that. It's just very strange how you have to come around and difficult. Okay, my next question is about the hours. So I know that Chick-fil-A doesn't operate on Sundays, but is this part of the approval process? I mean, if a later tenant were to come in where the Chick-fil-A building is, they could make up their own hours. We're not conditioning no Sunday operation of that, right? Even though it's written in there?
Correct. We're not regulating hours.
Okay,
this is
good.
not a use permit,
Okay.
so it's not really under
Okay,
consideration.
good. I know it just said Saturday, Monday through Saturday, so I just didn't want that to be something that some future tenant is stuck with. Okay.
Correct. It's not a conditional use permit
Okay,
that would
good,
run with the
good,
land.
Okay. Then I want to just talk about the monument sign a little bit. So I have the two monument signs that I think we're talking about, right? One is the 8-foot one, and then one is the 12-foot one, right? That I saw on the.
Correct. There's the 12.5-foot pylon sign that would be new at the driveway location, and then there's the existing Cattleman's Monument sign that's about 8.5 feet tall.
And is one of those the one that we are thinking is the freeway facing one?
No, that's not accurate. Only wall signage can
Okay.
be freeway oriented. The freeway oriented standards prohibit freestanding signage.
The freeway-oriented ones are the ones that are on the building, right?
They are specifically two wall signs that are on the north elevations of the restaurant building and retail building 3, respectively.
They're on the buildings
Correct.
themselves, right? Okay, the second story.
There's only a one-story building, but they're above the they're about 12.5 feet up on the
Okay.
elevation.
And they're not freestanding, you said, right?
Correct. Yeah, only wall signage can be considered freeway oriented within the sign code.
Okay, okay, that's fine, okay. And then my last question is about, I just want some clarity around the underground retention basin, that this basin is not, it has perforations, I'm guessing, right? In the bottom of it, so it will percolate into the groundwater? Yes, okay, right, because the way I just heard somebody say before, like it goes back into the city system, and I couldn't imagine that happening. No, right, only when it's at capacity, right?
That's correct.
Okay, good, okay, thank you. Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Commissioner Bauer, to follow up on your question about rooftop solar on carports, we don't believe that through the site plan and architectural review findings that there would be nexus to require it. And at present, we don't have policy otherwise that would direct us to require it or direct compliance. But I think that perhaps it's a conversation to have with the applicant, during discussion.
Okay.
For the site development, site plan and architectural review resolution
Okay,
consideration.
yeah, thank you, okay.
And then I also wanted to note that of course, the new construction would be required to comply with, state of California energy standards. So I think it's safe to assume that the new construction and the rehabilitation would result in far more energy efficient buildings than what have been constructed since the late 60s and early 70s.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Andrew. I would like it if you would consider putting some solar on top of your roof, just so we are asking for a lot of other applicants to do that, and they've said yes, and we would really like for you to consider that because you have such a nice roof that I think would, face the right way, and I think it would show a lot that you're looking to fit in and to embrace what we consider to be important here in Petaluma. So, thank you.
We will consider it.
Thank you.
Well, I have to confess, I think between Darren and Heidi, 90% of my questions have been covered. I still do have a few, and a few of them will retread some topics. But where I'd like to start right now is talking about the VMT analysis. Mike, in the analysis, it talks a lot about the exemptions and how, because of the estimated number of trips and its proximity to the bus stop routes, that more or less staff has discretion to exempt this from those considerations. Is the assumption that most of the traffic for this project is going to be offloaded from the freeway to the Chick-fil-A or adjacent renters essentially, and then back onto the freeway, or is there any projected spillover traffic into the city?
I'm not sure on that last point, but we have our in-house principal environmental planner who can speak more to the environmental analysis in the memo and also the ancillary technical report. So I'd have to defer to Olivia Irvin, our principal environmental planner, on that.
That would be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good evening. So when we look at BMT, we're looking at the change in the net use. So we're not, there's no indication that putting this at this location where there's an existing restaurant would somehow then generate traffic elsewhere in the city. It's really just coming to this site, and that would be the limit of the expectation there. They wouldn't necessarily be going anywhere else. If they were, then they would be doing that anyway.
No, that's fair. I'm just, if we're being honest, that site's been empty for a very long time in terms of activity. A lot of us have seen the kind of traffic flow that's gone to that site. So I'm just trying to get a handle for what the expectation is now that there'll be a more updated project there.
Yeah, so when we look at VMT relative to existing conditions, the case law and the way that the CEQA guidelines direct is that whether or not a site has been occupied today or in the recent history, it's still considered occupiable. And so it would be capturing those trips regardless of if there was a tenant in the last 6 months or 16 months.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I see the distinction. My apologies. Yeah. And then going back to considerations with regards to traffic, there is that, and I don't know if this is directed to you or to Mike, so I apologize ahead of time. Going back to the one way in, one way out situation that we do have, I assume that if the intended applicants are there, it's probably going to be a quite lively location. Has there been any long-term planning for potential traffic calming issues along that route?
That would probably be better asked. It's suited for Jeff Stutzman to answer, and just in terms of like traffic engineering and safety.
Trying to bring everybody up.
Yeah, I think the SPAR really just looked at the on-site circulation and less about kind of the existing roadways that serve the site.
I mean, I think to your point of traffic calming, part of it I think is just kind of wait and see what it's like. I think the existing Auto Center Row is a narrow street when it was built, and it's fully occupied with parking most of the time, Monday through Sunday, every day. So at least the parking outside gives a perception of traffic calming. There's little you can do out there, right? I mean, as we see there being a problem, we can address it with, like we've been doing elsewhere in town with like striped bulb outs. But it's a unique area that's next to Auto Center Row. The way it comes in, you kind of divert people down Auto Center Row and back out to like Stony Point, depending on the direction you're going. So there's opportunities, but again, I don't know until kind of how it comes in and the usage and how people begin to use it differently than it was before.
Fair enough. Thank you. And part of why I'm asking, for about 2 years while I was in grad school, that Denny's was the only place open past midnight where someone could get any studying done that wasn't at home. Because of that, it was remarkable to see night after night how many car accidents, fender benders, or just clogging that was happening on those side streets. And no one was there, because I can tell you Denny's after midnight is a pretty empty affair. So if it seems like I'm fixated on this, I just wanted to know if there was any kind of plan in place. Going back to the issue of parking, I completely understand that because there won't be a drive-through, the assumption is you want more parking, especially to have people wait and get their food. And I can imagine the tenants also have their fair share of parking asks who are not the Chick-fil-A, and there's another building coming in. Was there a study done to show what the peak parking needs were going to look like throughout the week?
There is no parking analysis conducted.
Chair, I might add too that because the use is a permitted use, there's no trigger to require a parking analysis. So that's part of the answer, but we do look for the applicant to further provide.
I'm only asking because I kind of assume that given Chick-fil-A was one of the applicants, they probably have had to do a number of these studies over the years and just had a general sense of what their peak flow looked like. That's all. I understand that it's not required.
Just to remind everybody, the parking on that panhandle coming in is unavailable for the project to use. So that took away all of that from the count. So the pressure was what we could put there around the actual Chick-fil-A. And then we have some other uses going on the other side that also need some parking. So it was really a balance of that whole thing.
Absolutely. This is not a judgment of the parking so much as just trying to get more context, that's all. And then one more parking related question, and this is not me trying to sound negative about parking again. How many spots are reserved for disabled or more senior friendly parking? Thank you.
There are 8.
8 spots. Are they placed closer to the actual sites or spread out?
They're placed strategically in front of each building, so they're spread out throughout the site.
Thank you. All right. Okay. To be honest, most of my questions related to design, trees, solar have now been answered. I did have one ask for the applicant if they would consider bike lockers for some of the parking. And the only reason I bring that up is because, again, having spent a lot of time in that area, you've got easy access to the freeway. And if we have any hope that people will actually bike to this site, and I can't honestly tell you that I assume that will happen, but if we have any hope that people will bike there, the more protection for their bike, the better, given how easy it would be to grab a bike and book it. So with that in mind, I will hand it over.
Thank you. It's nice being last because most of the questions are asked already, so. My focus is on two areas, landscape and then signing. The signing, is it, does it follow any city ordinance or any city regulation in terms of the amount of square footage of signing? Or is this, are you proposing your own?
I can feel that. They are using the formula prescribed by the sign code in the zoning code for shopping centers. So it's generally commensurate with the tenant square footage, and then there's sort of a constant variable that allows it to be a little bit more equitable for smaller tenants to not to get a little bit more. But it's a formula in the sign code.
All right. The other question, there's an existing tree next to the building that will be demolished, I believe. Is that tree not possible to keep?
The arborists, they are, as far as existing trees, they're following the recommendations in the arborist report. So they're removing the multi-stem plum, the yucca, and the eucalyptus that were recommended for removal, and they're retaining the elm, which was recommended to be retained.
Okay. The other question is, I'm kind of interested in getting more of a thick screen around the back edge, the freeway, road, boulevard, freeway edge. And it looks like you've got a constrained planter. And I'm not sure how the parking stall and the planter work if the curb is a wheel stop and you have a further overhang of the car, or if there's a wheel stop. Could anyone explain how that works? In other words, you have 17 or 18 feet from the wheel stop to the back of the stall. What is the parking stall shown here?
We're just referencing our site plan, and it does not appear as though we have wheel stops designed in as a part.
Okay, I guess I'm wondering if we can expand the tree planter to become the wheel stop as opposed to.
I mean, you're talking about the planters in front of the existing.
The planter that runs perpendicular to the
I'm
parking.
pretty sure that that's actually how we designed it, so that when you pull up in the spot in front of the planter, the curb acts as the wheel spot, and there's going to be a little bit of an overhang into the planter. I'm pretty sure that's how it was. I don't have anything that I can read on the plan, but that's generally how we do it.
Okay, is there a way to confirm that?
I'm confirming what Damon said. The intent is for there to be an overhang over the landscaped area.
So the car does overhang into the planter?
There's a curb and then a planter. So the curb is intended to be.
Okay. The main question, I guess, is the size of in my mind, the size of the tenant signs, not your main signing or the Chick-fil-A signing, but it's the signs on the parapet on the tenant buildings. Just a question of, does it need to be that big? What's the basis for that size? It feels a little like the building's there to hold up the sign.
So for each individual tenant, they'll have to go through their own sign permit that'll be based upon the square footage allotted by the city.
And is
That
that
answer your
represented
question?
in your elevations?
No, right in the elevations, it's just illustrated that a sign could be placed in that location.
So that's, the size means nothing?
Not on the master sign program.
Well, in your elevations, though, you show these signs on the building to scale. The question is that real or not?
Which elevations are you referring to, the Chick-fil-A or the main buildings?
Both.
So So the Chick-fil-A are shown to scale and are correct, but the individual tenants will be governed by the code at the time of submittal for those tenants. And for the Chick-fil-A signage themselves, they're within and slightly under the allowances by the city.
So Commissioner.
Can you put an elevation up that I'm talking about? It's a tenant building.
Which building, Commissioner? Which building is it? Okay.
I got it somewhere here, I think. It's the elevation of the building with the tenant sign saying signage. It's.
Try going to page A45
Okay,
in the
that's
plan
it.
set.
Okay, that's fine. So the lower elevation, those signage signs, those are not to scale, or they are to scale?
And I don't think he addressed your answered your question correctly. We actually worked very, very closely with Michael Janusik on making sure that what we were representing here was in fact what was allowed by the code. Like, for example.
Can you talk to the microphone? please?
For example, the freeway-oriented sign, that's only 18 inches, I think, is allowed, which is relatively small compared to what you see in other cities. So the elevations and the signage that you see were intended to meet what the code as they are represented. I think what he is saying is that once a tenant is ready to apply for their signage, they will have to then again submit sign plans that would
So they
still.
don't have to submit plans beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're both correct. They're to add a bit of clarification. So when they would submit their sign permit, there would be sort of a dual purpose plan check. There'd be a plan check for compliance with the sign code, and then there'd also be simultaneously a plan check by planning to make sure it's consistent with the approved master sign program.
So is there a master signage vocabulary that talks about materials and colors and all that, or each tenant have his own?
There's some general language. Ultimately, it has to be in compliance with the adopted sign code, where it speaks to material and lighting and all of those details. That would be reviewed at the sign permit submittal with what is actually specifically proposed.
And are there any rules on fluorescent or neon lights and that kind of stuff in the city?
I don't believe those. I believe those are prohibited by the sign code. So all of the, and again, I don't have the as much of the technical vocabulary, but I believe they're all internally illuminated LED lighting. There's no exposed lighting. There's no neon lights or I think raceways is a term used, and that's all sort of stipulated in the sign code. And that has been reviewed for compliance at this stage and will be reviewed again at the sign permit stage for consistency and compliance with the sign code.
Okay. On the elevations, also on your, this is A401.
Sorry, A 4.1 or A?
A401.
Okay, I don't know if there's an A 401.
Could I see that, please?
I believe it's the Chick-fil-A building sections is what he's looking for.
Oh, I see. There's two different
Yeah.
sets of indices. Okay.
Okay, that's good. All right, so this elevation shows the parapet line, and then it shows mechanical equipment that sticks up above that line. And the parapet, I assume, is to screen mechanical equipment, but is that, none of the elevations, the architectural elevations show any equipment on the roof?
Yeah, that's correct. This is a section, so you can see the guts.
Yeah, but will it be visible?
No, because it wouldn't. It's not shown in the elevations because it won't be visible. So it'll be effectively screened by the parapet.
It won't be visible because it looks visible to me here.
This is a section drawing, so it's cut across the.
It's set way back, you mean, so the angle?
No, I think the confusion is that it's a different type of drawing that shows the interior of the building. It's not showing the facade, so it's showing more than the exterior of the building.
Well, I guess my concern is that the mechanical should not be visible from the parking lot.
Yeah, it's not. This is a section drawing, so you'll want to refer to an elevation drawing, which would be visible. So here, this is the elevation, which shows the exterior.
Yeah.
There's no visible equipment.
Okay. You showed also a picture kind of from the Petaluma Boulevard elevation, looking back down at the project. I guess is the mechanical visible from there? One of the images you went through was.
I think I can find that one. Okay, so there's one of the improvements they'll make on Retail Building 1 is adding this parapet here, which would effectively screen the roof-mounted equipment on the existing Retail Building 1. And then sorry, it's a large file, bear with me.
Yeah, this one, okay.
So there would be a parapet here. They're showing it as, and it's a 3D perspective, so it's not necessarily an elevation that is.
But from the elevations, it looks like those air conditionings are way above the line of that parapet, even though it's in the middle. Now that you're at a higher elevation, it's going to be highly visible, I would think.
Yeah, so it's possible, given the elevation difference, that it could be visible. This really isn't the right type of. This is more of a rendering, so it's not really the right type of exhibit to know definitively. One alternative could be equipment specific screening, which is conditioned for Retail Building 2. So I don't know if I can find an image of that one. So Retail Building 2 has equipment on the roof as well, and there's a condition of approval in your packet this evening that would require equipment-specific screening for these mechanical units. That way, there's less of that ability to see over the top of the parapet if you get enough perspective. It's certainly something you could pose to the applicant if you feel that you haven't seen enough in the drawings that demonstrate that the equipment on Retail Building 1 would be effectively screened as viewed from Petaluma Boulevard North.
All right, thank you. That's it.
Darren?
Just because I'm assuming we're going to combine sign questions with this. The last question, just determining conformance on the monument sign. And this is from staff and maybe people who are in this area driving it a little more than myself. I believe Cattleman's is the only monument sign pointing folks to Auto Center Drive businesses as well as Stony Point businesses. And I'm thinking basically an analog or as a comparison, do we have monument signage for any businesses along Stony Point that aren't facing Petaluma Boulevard North, and any monument signage for anyone on Auto Center Drive back there who again is not facing Petaluma Boulevard North? Just thinking of conformance of that request.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah. So just thinking
I'm not
for any
really-
of the businesses along Stony Point, right, that aren't facing Petaluma Boulevard, and any businesses on Auto Center Drive that aren't facing Petaluma Boulevard, do any of them have monument signage out on Petaluma Boulevard pointing you back to their business, akin to what we have from the remnant Cattleman sign?
Well, we could go out there and do a visual survey, but I can't tell you right now, we don't have those data. So we didn't survey for that question.
Okay, and again, I'm just thinking if we're asked to make a determination for whether this monument sign conforms to the visual, visual conformance to the area design conformance, it would help to know if there was other signs like that or if this stuck out. So yeah, if we have any information on that, that would be useful. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Chair Hooper, in response to your question about bike lockers, current zoning ordinance regulations do require that a percentage of all bike parking be in lockers, be secured, also be covered. So they would be required to comply with the bicycle parking requirements in the current ordinance.
Fantastic, thank you. Are there any other questions before we move to public comment? Okay, with that, I'm going to close commissioner questions and move on to public comment on the item. If you have any public comments that you wish to make, please bring your cards up to the clerk. And with that, I'm going to start with Dave Alden.
I guess I'm old-fashioned. I probably would prefer Cattleman's to remain rather than become a Chick-fil-A, but I know that really doesn't matter, and it shouldn't. I'm not arguing anything different than that. However, I am bothered by, probably seconding something that the chair said, I am bothered by the VMT analysis. If I could read from the analysis that was submitted, the project would effectively attract localized trips that would otherwise travel longer distances to similar facilities. I don't know what your feelings have been, but when I talk to people in town, or actually read more on social media about it, there's a lot more people saying, yay, now we can go to Chick-fil-A rather than settle for some other chicken sandwich in Petaluma, than there are people saying, yay, we don't need to drive to Rohnert Park anymore. That tells me that we're not interrupting very many longer trips, we're inducing longer trips. That's not a scientific study, that's anecdotal, but it seems pretty clear to me. And I guess as someone who spent 10 years pushing off and on for the VMT legislation, the adopted rules, to do things like putting our uses closer to where we live, I'm just disappointed when I see loopholes exercised to duck away from that and continue building the way we've always built, even as climate change is getting worse. I'm frustrated by that. I hope the commission agrees with me and will take a harder look at that VMT exemption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Jessica.
Thank you to the staff and the commission and the applicant. My main issue when reading through this is 181 parking spaces. That seems insane for a fast food restaurant where you're not going to be sitting for 8 courses, lots of seatings over the night, and a handful of retail spaces. This feels really old-fashioned for our town, which is trying to move, away from cars towards our climate goals, and I just can't understand why we are satisfied with 181 spaces. While I understand that this is an improvement and there's 93 trees, which is better than 4 trees, it just feels ill-conceived and too old-fashioned for what we're trying to build in Petaluma. So I hope the commission will push on those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And now we have Rob.
Yeah. Good evening. Tough site. It's a hard site to build on. Commissioner Bauer, you started to talk about the egress and ingress getting out into the street there. And it's not as much a question, just I drive through the area. Just if the commission is planning on doing some kind of a study about adjusting the traffic lights for Stony Point and that kind of a thing, because the outflow from grab and go, parking spaces and everything else there, something about a 2-car length stretch before you're there at the stop to turn. And there's active traffic. There's always a green light that's either turning people onto that flow or not. So unless all the lights go to red so that traffic can clear out at some point from there, an incredible backup at that point and a very high potential for accidents. That's my only comment.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further public comments?
We do not, and it's also important to note that we received no public comments prior to this meeting for this item.
Understood. And with that, we're now going to move into a discussion for the commissioners on the site plan or site development site plan and architectural review, specifically for the site plan, not for the signs. We'll do that after. So with that, I'm going to change up the order a little bit. I'm going to start with Darren, and we'll go down, and then we'll end with Rick.
Thanks for that. I'll run through my points, then kind of pick on some things that the public said there to see if we can tease out a little bit, because I think there were some great points made. Just as kind of an advocate of trees and more native, better canopy coverage in our city, I understand that 93 trees is miles ahead of 4 trees. I think our standards for what we expect with landscape plans has gone up a lot just in the past few years. I think with groups like Relief Petaluma, a nonprofit group that does a lot of volunteer tree planting and helps advocate for trees, and our existing tree advisory committee, there's been a real push to try to make discretionary review or push in discretionary review for more natives, better canopy coverage. So I would love to see the applicant explore a different palette of trees. I understand a lot of commercial arborists do default to the strawberry tree and the crepe myrtle. They're not the best trees for biodiversity, for actual any kind of cooling effect on asphalt areas. And we have a lot of trees that really work well in Petaluma. Like I referenced the sycamore. We have a myriad of Quercus species that aren't all ideal because they drop, but there's an exploration to be had there. Question for staff. Obviously, this did not come before the tree advisory committee. I'm assuming that if we wanted the tree advisory committee to look at it, what would that process look like? I wouldn't want to hold up a project that otherwise the committee wants to move forward, but at the same time, I think it would be terrific to include some of our landscape architects and folks on tree advisory committee to give input.
Sure. Well, the commission could decide to continue the item and ask that it go back to the tree advisory committee. But we do have 2 members of the tree advisory committee on the commission this evening, and I believe that's a 5-member committee. So the other option would be for the commission to direct modifications to the tree palette to increase the utilization of native tree species or to add more trees to the site.
Okay, yeah, I think I would love to add that direction, and I'll let staff craft what that would look like, because I don't want to be prescriptive with species here. I think there are a lot of considerations that go into every site for considering tree species, but I would love to I mean, for me, I would love to see a rule in Petaluma that we stop planting crepe myrtles. I know people love them. I know they're incredibly durable, but they don't do a lot for environment. And again, they take a long time to get any effective canopy coverage. So, you know, if I had my druthers, I'd remove those entirely. But I think if we can condition the approval with something like applicant will, and I guess that's the question, right? How prescriptive would I have to be as conditioning it? Would I have to say, use these trees right now? Or could there be more general guidance of 60% native, larger, anything like that?
I suppose you could throw out some parameters if the applicant's amenable to that. There's nothing in the code or the general plan that really is objective like that to provide that sort of direction. But certainly we have goals to enhance the inventory of native trees. I think staff could craft something that allows the applicant to work with staff to increase the number of native trees within suitable locations on site, as sort of recommended by a certified landscape architect, to make sure that they would be healthy and thrive. But if you're looking for a certain number, I think we'd probably look to you for guidance on that number, and then make sure that the applicant is comfortable with that number.
Yeah, and you know, I threw out, I mean, already with Western Redbud, we're getting a decent percentage.
Roughly a third.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a question to the applicant team. This may complicate because you have your consulting arborist you would want to check with before you say, yes, we can definitely hit that number. But, you know, for me, I would love, like I threw out 60%, you know, my ideal is 100%, but would something like 50, 60% native trees seem tenable? Maybe removing some of the ornamentals like crepe myrtle, does that seem anywhere in the wheelhouse for this project? Because I think it would be a big improvement.
Is it okay for me to speak? We're open to any suggestions you have with regard to that. I was under the impression that we were using a list that was specified by City of Petaluma, which most cities actually have and give you and say you got to work within this framework. So that was my naivety to how this came apart. I am not looking to use a sycamore though, because those are very difficult to deal with in a retail shopping center with the leaves that come down. It is my favorite tree. So is an oak tree. I mean, anyway, but we are open to changing what's on there. Not a problem. So however you want to do that, throw it out there and that's fine.
Would that be something, if I made a motion, I would add that condition? Or are you guys keeping maybe a list? Like I said, I think, and I'll leave it to discussion. I see Roger already raising his hand. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I would propose something like a 50% or 60% target for native trees, just to go along with some of the other policy, especially tree policy, that admittedly right now is not as well codified as it should be. But that's why we hope to be that voice to get that harmonization of what we expect for tree policy. So thank you for that. That's excellent. You know, the other thing I wanted to throw out, again, I referenced convertible landscape parking spaces. I too think that, you know, there's a lot of parking on site. It's only 11 more than the minimum required. There are those gas station spaces. I think when you continue on the line from that panhandle, the parking line that goes there and then immediately kind of jogs, I don't want to say to the south, but on the site kind of goes toward the bottom of the sight line on the plan. I would love to explore possibly convertible landscape spaces for some of those if possible. And I'm just thinking those are the furthest from the current retail buildings. That might be a great addition to make a commitment to say, look, we're having more green coverage. They can still be converted into parking spaces if needed. I would love to see a discussion around that. I think that's a minimal kind of give for what is seen as a lot of parking, I think, right now. Solar on roofs, I think Commissioner Bauer hit it on the head. We're asking that from a lot of developers. I think that would be a worthy route to explore. Again, I don't know what we would condition with a SPAR approval, if we would have to mandate that solar be included, again, if it's a percentage, if it just has to be explored. But maybe I'll let other commissioners talk about that before I throw something out there. And then I've got two other pieces. I'll save one of them. The VMT concerns, I think a member of the public raised a great point about trips and that determination. I don't know if we have staff here who can speak to the VMT determination and maybe what went into that, but that would be terrific because I've gotten a couple emails about VMT concerns. So
I defer to Principal Planner, Environmental Planner Olivia Irvin.
So when we are looking at making a determination for VMT, we are guided to the city's adopted SB 743 implementation guidelines that set the parameters for looking at VMT. And as a retail project that is less than 30,000 square feet, there's a clear screening out that occurs, and that was vetted through a public process, and that's been an adopted document. Staff does retain discretion when there is a need for something. But again, as I explained previously, there is an existing facility here that is would have the potential to generate trips in a similar manner. And so looking at all of the facts of the record, it did not appear needing to be elevated to a full VMT analysis. So that is why the determination was made for screening, and that evidence is in your packet.
Okay. Thank you for retreading some ground to help explain that. I think there's a challenge on this site in that it is commercial zoned. I mean, ostensibly whatever retail is built there on this site location is probably going to be a little more auto-centric than we would like, with kind of how we're moving the conversation now to be more bike, pedestrian, active transport friendly. I think this site, you're not going to get around. A lot of people are going to get there in cars. So I think that's going to be an embedded challenge for any applicant here. I think reducing parking goes a way toward disincentivizing automobiles a little bit and better making use of the space. But I think that's going to be something you run into. And also highlighting the safety and traffic concerns. I think a member of the public brought up a great point that waiting at that red light, people are going to be chomping at the bit after getting their food to turn right out of there as fast as possible. So, and maybe Jeff, you'd be the one to speak to that. If we have concerns about road safety there, if there's anything we can do in terms of traffic calming or anything that we have in mind for limiting the potential for collision there from people exiting, I guess going in and exiting, but exiting specifically.
Without specifically looking really at the details, I think from the trip volumes, I don't see any safety issues with it. It's a right turnout situation. There's plenty of sight distance. So if you were to come to that intersection, stop. You can proceed when it's safe. There's plenty of sight distance. We even checked the kind of the cattleman's sign that's there. It's set back far enough that it prevents any sight distance issues. The overcrossing was recently reconstructed through SCTA and Caltrans a couple of years back. So we definitely have a much better facility running on Petaluma Boulevard than we did in the past. So with those elements, I don't really see any issues. And again, that's for people who are turning kind of right to head potentially, I guess, east on the boulevard versus maybe people who are heading Stony Port or back into town, may loop back around a back road and get back to Honor Center into kind of industrial to get back out and meet that signalized intersection. So there's a lot of ways out. And from the looks of it and everything and the use of the cattlemen's, from like a traffic perspective from the city, I don't see any safety issues.
And there wasn't a history of a particular colorful history of accidents or anything of that site. I mean, I know we talked about the Denny's, but does that bear out in any of the data? Or, I'm throwing you a data question on the spot, but
I don't know the exact collisions offhand, say for the last 5 years, but at least from knowledge and working on like the local road safety plan, which was approved by the city, this was definitely not a hot spot that was brought up.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Thanks. Okay, and then I'll save my comment on signage. I think the last thing that I'll just throw out to the applicant, I think a nice touch, I brought it up before, Petaluma, chicken capital of the world. I think including some historical callback to that, some piece about that, could be a great way to kind of reach out to or kind of bring the public into the fold a little bit, something unique about our area. And like I said, I'm sure you guys are aware of that. This is kind of a totally separate piece, but I'd love to see something like that in there whenever we have the opportunity. And I know Janice isn't here. She's the scion of one of our poultry families, but I think that would be a great callback. So I'll just wrap up with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Rackison. I think I'm generally okay with the project. I think the architecture is pretty good. It gives a good nod to what it used to be and to our city. I'm just having, the one thing that I am having a little bit of a hard time with is the parking, and 181 spots for this seems just really a lot. I agree. I think, going into this age where we're having a lot, it's getting a lot hotter out there, especially in urban environments, the more pavement there is, the hotter it is going to be. Cities, I think, are, 10, 20 degrees hotter than their rural counterparts. So I think the more parking spots we put in, the hotter it's going to get, and the just more unpleasant, if not deadly, it's going to get here as we go forward. So I think any time that we can reduce the amount of pavement, we should. And 11 more, I don't think we need them. And I think they should be made into some sort of like natural landscaping or something like that instead, and maybe more trees and more shade in this area. I just don't think we need more pavement on the ground, and certainly not more than we need. That's my comment on that. If other commissioners agree, we could think about how we could reduce the parking there, but that's all I have.
I will say I recognize that as a C2 and a former cattleman's site largely, this was recognized as being essentially a similar project. And I appreciate all the information we've gotten about how the VMT standards were considered. I will say, though, that a Chick-fil-A is very different from a cattleman's, I think, in terms of the community of people who will go to it. The reason why a cattleman's is a sit-down restaurant, if we're being honest, a Chick-fil-A is where you get a chicken sandwich and go. So it's not to disparage Chick-fil-A in that way, it's just a different model. With that in mind, I think one thing that I definitely like to see from staff going forward, we still have the discretion to require more of an analysis and to not exempt right out of the gate just because of the number of potential trips. I think when we're looking at effectively fast food restaurants, we should absolutely be considering the VMT regardless of what the former site might have been. That is going to be, by definition, more traffic, more activity. And I would also like staff to consider that a bus stop half a mile away isn't enough. Because I checked it during the meeting, I checked it about 4 different times the other day, I checked it about a week before that. Speaking of data rather than anecdotal, you take a bus, whether it's the 11, the 44, the 48, or occasionally the 46, which I was surprised by, and the 101, you're averaging anywhere from 45 to 48 minutes. You could get down to 30 if you add a lift in there at some point, but that's the shortest distance you get, or the shortest amount of time that you get trying to take public transit. I don't think that that's realistic, that many people are going to take a bus to get there, which I would just like to flag again. I understand that may not matter as a consideration for this project since we're already here, but in the future, just having a bus stop there, we have to look at what the actual rate of bus access is going to look like. With regards to all of the parking, I too, like everyone else so far, would like to see the parking reduced on this site. I know it doesn't have a driveway or a drive-through, but essentially the get your order and wait is just a nicer version of a drive-through. You've very effectively bypassed our ordinance in that way, and that's all right. You have technically, I'm not arguing that, but it's the same idea. 181 spots at the edge of town when we are trying to reduce and, as Commissioner Rackison pointed out, disincentivize this kind of driving, especially as we're going into our next general plan. It's hard to swallow having those spots. I would also like to ask the applicant more specifically, though, to add more senior and disabled parking. one of the largest populations in Petaluma, and I take the comment from the public, from Dave, very seriously. We're going to have more people coming from Petaluma. That's part of why I asked the question. I don't think it's going to be as many people stopping off as has been proposed. We have an older population. I can't go a meeting now without getting 5 or 6 emails from folks wanting to know why we didn't consider more disability parking. I think we need to add more on this site, especially if you're going to have 181 spots. Going back to the traffic concern, I recognize that my examples were anecdotal, but I think we should also recognize that we have a fundamental data issue when we're looking at a lot of these things. We've only very recently started requiring more traffic data on some of our projects, and I think as a whole, that's a problem we're going to have to grapple with. And finally, having understood very clearly what the defined parameters are for this discussion, this meets most of our SPAR concerns. I also sign on to concerns about solar, making sure that we're really embracing a better tree and kind of better tree outlook. I'm not going to try and re-summarize all of what Commissioner Atkinson pointed out. But one thing I would like to flag, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but actually please don't try and add the Petaluma history motif cheaply onto the project. As much as I think that can entice some folks, we actually, whether it seems ridiculous to someone from out of town or not, we take it very seriously. So if the Chick-fil-A starts making egg puns and doing that sort of thing and trying to show itself as a historical monument, you're going to take off more people than you entice. So I just wanted to flag that. And I know we're supposed to get to a motion, but I don't want to get there before everyone's had a chance to make their comments. So, Roger.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort to upgrade the center. It certainly needs something, and I think what you're doing is a good direction. My primary issue is with landscape, and I support the native focus of trees. You've got quite a bit of sycamores already planted or proposed here, so adding more I don't think would violate the landscape architect. There's many areas where I can see we could add trees, larger trees. I'm not too sure about the edges, where I'd like to see more screening done, because you've got a freeway edge and a kind of an awkward condition, and then you have a pretty nasty property line on the other side that looks like truck storage or something. But so a stronger landscape edge would be my preference, and more larger trees. I agree the crepe myrtle and the strawberry tree are not really trees. And I think, cities like Sacramento have a shade requirement. You're required to have a certain percentage of shade on the ground within 10 years, coverage of a tree shade. I think that's a really good direction for Petaluma to go in. I'm not too sure about the idea. I like the idea of the chicken connection, but I think you're right. There's a bigger danger in that. I like the idea of solar. I think that's always a smart thing. If it's cost effective, I think it would be worth considering. I would like to suggest that we have the landscape architect do a revised plan based on the input that you've received, that basically tries to be a little more aggressive. And I don't know how that is resubmitted to the city, if it has to be part of a separate submittal or has to come to the planning commission. But I think that the landscape architect will understand our goals and could probably do some adjustments that would work. I actually tried to call the landscape architect. I haven't talked to anybody, but to give them input. Not specific input, but just ask, can they revise or adjust the plan? The other issue is signing issue. I think that the tenant signing, I'm not so concerned about the monument signs or the Chick-fil-A. In fact, I think Chick-fil-A sign is pretty nice, pretty modest. It looks modest compared to the tenant signing, which looks very aggressive. And, you know, those parapets, they used to hang the sign from the parapet. Now this one stacks the sign on top of the parapet, and it just looks gigantic. And I think every tenant will have a different logo, every tenant will have a different requirement, so I'm not sure we've got that resolved very well. I don't know how we do that in terms of sign application permits or aesthetics, how that's done, but I think that's the part of signing I'm most concerned about. So, I mean, my sense is, Darren, if we could get the landscape architect to, not the tree committee and not the planning commission to make the tree decisions, come back with a proposed plan that we could approve, I would be more comfortable going that direction.
So with that, just to quickly bounce back there, you know, I was thinking we could propose a percentage of native coverage and maybe a percentage lot coverage. You know, obviously lot not already occupied by a building, a percentage of coverage there, rather than continue and ask them to come back to say, hit these percentages, ask them to work the plan, and then planning will make sure they're in conformance. Just so I'm understanding, would you rather have them do another plan and then come back, or give guidelines and kind of know that that's happening?
I'm not clear on
Well, just
lot
that-
coverage. What do you mean by lot coverage?
Well, so I mean, you talked about like Sacramento has that requirement for a certain amount of shade. So like 20% non-building footprint lot coverage and 60% native. Would you feel comfortable with that, or would you want to see something more tangible?
I think we're just guessing at what this, you know, I'd rather have the professional come back with a recommendation than us trying to guess what a solution would be. I don't know, 30%, 20%, 50%, I'm not sure which of those would work here or which makes sense. So I'd rather have their landscape architect recommend to us what they propose. Because if it works or doesn't work, it's still their problem, not our problem. Yeah.
We could make as a condition for this that they will work with landscape architect to actually bring back a plan and work with staff. We don't have to require them to come back to us necessarily. Just to throw it out there from a pragmatic perspective.
So that we would require a different landscape plan with certain guidelines that then staff would implement, but not continue the SPAR process per se.
Yeah, because I do have concerns about throwing out percentages right? And at the same time, I don't see how realistic it is to have them come back for a full meeting of the planning commission to do that.
That's my concern,
element. Yeah.
Well, and percentages, like we don't have that in city policy yet, so it's hard to start using that as a metric.
And you could include the tree commission as part of this discussion, right?
I think that wouldn't hurt if there is a way where we can move forward with another SPAR and then make a condition of that a revised planting report that goes to tree committee. I'm just not sure what that would look like. That seems like we're going back then to discretionary for part of it, so.
Right. I think that would be you could perhaps condition it to require that the landscape plan go to the tree advisory committee for review, but I'm not certain that the tree advisory committee has the authority to approve. So
I would agree, and I'm looking at the tree advisory committee's duties right now, and it does say advise, but nothing about them having the discretion to approve. So,
and then the other thing too is I wonder, you know, we've talked about how much shading or what percentage of native trees. Even if we go to the tree advisory committee, we still don't get to those prescriptive or objective standards that would drive and would support the applicant responding in a way that would be any different than if the commission established them this evening and then allowed staff to review for compliance with a condition of approval. So there's that. But I also another point on the tree plantings and consideration that I would like to suggest is if the council is compelled to consider requiring a reduction in parking, that would create opportunities for more tree planting and for tree planting areas that could host larger trees. So it may be that we sort of pause conversation about the tree planting requirements and first take on the subject of a potential parking reduction and see if that's going to be agreed to by the staff, if that's where the commission wants to go. And then we could go and look then at increasing tree canopy or placing some sort of minimum standard on that.
I think that's an excellent idea, that if we could decide how many cars we were willing to lose, but those spaces would then be added to the existing planters or widened planters so we can get larger trees, I think that would solve a lot of problems. So if we I don't know how many, if we can do that, if we can reduce parking by 10 cars or 15 or whatever, and say that goes to landscape tree planting. But the other thing I want to say is that they have a professional landscape architect who's I would rather let them continue to make the decisions. We'll give them some direction in terms of how, parking, and let them come back with percentage of trees, natives, bigger canopy, and the whole thing, and let that go to staff with our direction.
I just thought percentage and any guidance on species helps, because they have had the professional arborist who was given a palette, and we have what we have. So we've got to provide some kind of tangible guidance instead of just come back. It's like, hey, come back, swap out some of these trees. That's why I thought percentage native gets you to a point of, have we met it or not? Have we met the threshold? They already have approximately 20 to 30%. So if we ask for another 20 to 30% and reduce parking, does that give them enough guidance to come back and get something that we would know that we feel comfortable with, like an objective standard?
Well, if we ask their landscape architect to find ways to increase tree planting in the parking lot by removing key stall locations and putting a tree there, to try to get an even canopy, as even a canopy coverage as possible, well distributed throughout the parking lot, with large canopy trees, native preferred, but understanding that there are some indigenous trees that do pretty well, but not native. But and let them take the professional responsibility. I think that would be fine.
Yeah, I'd like to give the applicant the opportunity, because I have an idea of what question we're going to need to ask after this. Go ahead.
We are well open to changing the mix of the trees, not a problem. Look forward to doing that. I know you guys don't know me from anybody, but we do this a lot, and we are proud of the developments that we develop, and we like them to look good into the future and have a legacy that is long-lasting. So I know that gets me about a bus ticket somewhere else, but I'm just saying that's what we were here for. We're trying to make it look nice. In terms of more ADA stalls, happy to add more of those. Everybody is okay with that. We can do that. That will, by virtue of doing that, that will reduce the number of spaces considerably. The question is, how many more would you like? And we can work to that, okay? If we need to add a few more landscape pockets, happy to do that. So we are open to those suggestions. We would like to make it a condition here and make it happen. No problem.
I do have a, oh no, thank you very much for, I actually really appreciate that. I was expecting a very different tone of, oh my God, why are you guys doing this in front of us? There is a middle ground, because I think the idea of we address parking than trees is fair, but remember I'm blanking on the project, but we had that large factory we were looking at where they had a whole chunk of backfill parking that wasn't paved. Remember? And it was kind of
LabCon.
It was LabCon.
Yeah.
Right,
where they
sure.
had that optional, yeah.
The difference is that LabCon did not desire to develop the amount of parking that was required for the project, because they didn't see a demand
Right.
from their operational activity to park that many vehicles. And so the code does allow us to create a parking reserve area that is landscape, and then to convert that parking reserve area to parking in the event that the operational activity creates the demand for parking. So I think we've actually got the opposite happening here, in that the applicant is proposing an amount of parking based upon their determination of what the operational activity is going to demand. And so I believe the commission's position or desire is to reduce that amount of parking permanently, as opposed to putting it into a parking reserve. So.
Absolutely. The reason I bring up the idea of a parking reserve, however, is that there seems to also be a fair bit of dispute over how much parking is really going to be required for this site. So it kind of gives us the middle ground of not starting from jump with 181 parking units. And at the same time, if this really turns into the booming spot of Petaluma needing all of those sites, we'd still have it. And I only say that because I hear the idea of, if we reduce parking, we add more trees. But you're going to have 93 trees, and you want to talk about a percentage of shade and talk about percentage native and get that right. If there's a question as to how many parking spots we have, and that holds up the discussion of what the tree makeup's going to look like, I just worry that's going to procedurally flummox this a bit. That's the only reason I bring up the idea of having the reserve as kind of a middle ground to reduce parking and allow the kind of more professional tree landscaping issue to move forward.
Yeah, I mentioned the convertible landscaping, I think, is kind of like the minimum ask to reduce it. And I think that, that's kind of like a nice minimum. Hey, I think it's 11 spaces we're over, devote those to temporary landscaped areas, and ask for a redo of landscaping plan with a target for at least native in mind. Canopy coverage is a little more elusive, but I think at least a percentage of native. But the question does arise, do we have enough space for some of the bigger trees? But I'd be inclined to go with that, to do landscape convertible parking reserve for those 11 extra spaces, as well as ask the landscape architect to come back to staff with a plan. And I know percentage of native isn't exact either, but I think it gives us some metric. I think if you ask 60% native plantings with guidance to swap out some of the ornamentals, I think that gets us closer.
Here's my only question is that if it's convertible space, if you plant it with trees, then you have to remove the trees to get the parking.
It's not convertible.
I think that's even a worse condition. I think you need to get the trees you want and the parking you want. And I think somewhere in between, you're asking for no curbs and gutters, but then they have to put in curbs and gutters when they put parking in. There's all kinds of compaction issues. You compact it for a parking lot, you don't plant trees in it. You don't compact, you have to come back and compact it. It's very troublesome.
Well, if you do the landscape reserve, you wouldn't be planting in it, right? So we would basically be assenting to, look, there's enough tree planting space as is, and do something with these extra parking.
I would say drop 10 parking stalls and add 10 tree planters in those stalls, wherever they feel is the best to do it.
Well, and if the applicant seems amenable to that, I mean, yeah, of course, less parking, more trees is the
that's
best
the
case.
ideal, right? Yeah.
Well, we in the last iteration, I agreed we were add more ADA stalls, so that's going to reduce parking significantly, because every ADA stall is probably 2 spaces. So if I add 4 or 5 more of those, we're now eliminating 5 extra parking spaces immediately. I'd like the convertible idea, because obviously we don't know how the site's going to live and breathe, and would like to have some flexibility, which I think is a great suggestion. And happy to do that, and whatever you guys want to condition for the number of that. If you want to make it the net amount, which will be 6 or 7 after the ADA that we're doing. I mean, just try to hear what you guys want, and I'm trying to give it to you. We obviously want to get this done and make you guys happy. So should we say 4 more ADA stalls? 5 more ADA stalls?
On the ADA stalls, you might not love this answer, but I was going to ask, is there a way for us to have that question, have the senior commission consult on that question? Because our senior commission gets left out of this quite often, and they're literally the folks who talk about the needs for more ADA accessibility and might have an idea of that area, especially given some of the senior living centers that are nearby. So I just wanted to ask Andrew, is that realistic to have the senior commission give feedback on the number of ADA stalls?
To have which commission?
For our senior commission?
I think that I was just reviewing the percentage, and we could do that. I was wondering if we don't look more at the minimum, because the percent that's currently required is based upon the total number of parking spaces, and then I believe like 2% have to be accessible. I'm not sure, does your designer have that answer? Okay, thank you. So I think that if we looked at, say, we double that percent required and see where we're at, we could take it to the senior committee. But what would they use as a standard is, I guess, my question.
I mean, if we're being honest, a lot of the standards that are even underpinning this are a little bit arbitrary. So what I was focused on more in that circumstance was getting the anecdotal evidence from the members who are there.
Sure.
And I'm only basing that off, like, for example, our parking minimums are entirely based on questionable math. So that's why I wanted to get their input. That's
Well,
all.
if the commission's comfortable with the anecdotal evidence, then I think then we can do that. That's certainly achievable.
But what is the baseline percentage right now?
I believe it's 2%.
Just so we know, the actual required ADA spots are 6, so we already had 2 more than what was required per your code. So if we're wanting to make it more than that, and we were talking about adding, 4 more, so that would be 12, right? So that'd be double your code.
I think doubling the code would be fine.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are we all good with that? Okay.
I'd like to hear from maybe Rick and Heidi if you guys want to weigh in, because I feel like we're kind of volleyballing back and forth here, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I'm happy with more ADA, but I still would like to have less actual pavement and more canopy, actually. That would be something I would be in favor of.
And Rick, I don't think you got to speak yet for your comment altogether, and I apologize for that.
Not yet, no. So I'll segue, maybe I'll start, I was going to end with the parking, but I'll start with it. I think my general feeling for this particular site is I actually don't have a problem with the level of parking. I think this is one of those sites that is going to benefit a lot from highway traffic. And I just feel like that this is also not one of the sites that would benefit from disincentives to parking, just because there are not a lot of great alternatives by nature of its proximity to the city and other alternative modes of transportation. So I'm not going to throw myself in front of a path that's going in a positive direction if other commissioners feel differently, but that wasn't one of my top issues, at least in terms of parking. More broadly, I do want to commend the applicant. I think there's that site has really been looking for some improvement and rehabilitation over the years, and as a gateway to the city. I do think that this is a substantial improvement, obviously, to what's there and what's been there, notwithstanding the fact that my son worked at Cattlemanton High School and has a lot of fond memories of it. I think time marches on, and that area is definitely calls for an improvement, and this looks like is certainly one. Also want to recognize the addition of 90 plus trees and the pretty extensive water management and retention measures at that site. I would support an increase in the number of natives. I think that's an important consideration to really round out a good tree program up there. I want to go back to my comment earlier, my question earlier posed at the time about the electric vehicle charging. I recognize that this is not a condition of approval under SPAR, but rather than using a stick, I'd like to offer some carrots. Level 3 charging is greatly encouraged and promoted by National Electric Vehicle program under the, I think it was the investment or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, allocated, I think, $5 billion for electric vehicle charging. California was successful through the California Energy Commission of getting $384 million of those funds specifically slated for level 3 chargers on alternative vehicle corridors, of which Highway 101 is one. So those are very, very generous grants that can be attained through the California Energy Commission. And also, adds a revenue element to those level 3 chargers. So I encourage the applicant to look into that, and it accomplishes a lot of our aspirations under Chapter 4 of the general plan, the energy section. At the same time, I think is really, really beneficial for your development as well. I also asked about solar at the site, specifically potentially the use of solar canopies. I do realize that runs, cross current to the prospect of more trees and greater canopy at the site. So, alternatively, I'd encourage, looking at, roof plans and roofs that would be more amenable to a solar installation there. And I think that works well with electrical vehicle charging, which will require a lot of electrical infrastructure at that site, and to be able to augment that with a corresponding solar system on site, I think would go a long way to both those sustainability efforts under Chapter 4, as well as your own electrical planning for that site. In terms of the signage, certainly recognize that that's a difficult location to both, attract customers as well as manage traffic. So for those reasons of better traffic flow, ingress and egress, and to avoid potential customers coming off and not recognizing where the entrance is, those who aren't familiar with the area, I would support staff, having I'd say the greatest extent of latitude to allow for maximum signage there, promoting, especially the proper entrance to that parking lot. I think that would actually go a long way of alleviating, traffic concerns and public safety concerns in that area. So I think those are all of my kind of prepared words, but happy to dive in any further with any discussion with other commissioners about the trees or parking.
I'm going to ask that we get to a motion on site plan. From what I'm hearing, not to discount certain comments just made, but from what I'm hearing, there seems to be at least a decent amount of consensus on increase ADA, decreased overall parking, a process for staff to work with their landscape architects after this to change the percentages when it comes to overall tree population, and a desire for solar. These are the things that seem to have come up the most so far in our discussion. Before we can add conditions, though, we've got to give them specifics. So I'm going to kind of go through one by one with folks here. I think for ADA, doubling to 12, does that seem, do this informally right now?
I'd agree with that.
How many parking stalls do we want to remove?
So if there's 11 above the minimum, we're removing 4 with the ADA. Gives us that gives us.
Please, no comments from the audience. Thank
Well,
you.
I guess I should confirm. Are we 11 above minimum standard? Is that my understanding? Or the minimum
The
required
minimum
parking?
number of parking spaces required is 62. They've proposed 181, which is 11 more than the existing 170. So.
Okay, we're 11 more than existing, far and
Right,
away above
and-
the minimum.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an important distinction. So, I mean, I would vote, I would say we look at that line further. I mean, there's the area right in front of Chick-fil-A that I don't love, that is very dense. That would be kind of call out for some kind of planting with additional trees right there. As well as those, again, when you continue through that gas station parking, you kind of go at that angle, following the line furthest from the Chick-fil-A and the other retail. I think those are prime sites to remove parking potentially. Andrew, please.
Commissioner Rackison, I believe that the parking that's in the Panhandle, sort of on the drive opposite the gas station, is parking that's under easement for the gas station.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't very good at describing. So as you follow the line beyond that and you kind of take that angle into the applicant's parking, you see it kind of follow, that's a line that's pretty far from retail. That back lot there, and it doesn't, before you get to the, yes, exactly, Roger, before you get to the EV segment,
Right.
that looks like a prime area to reduce parking, as well as if there's something we could do with a landscape area in front of it. I think that's important. I had conflated numbers in my head, so I think there's more we can do to change parking, a lot more that we can do to cut some spaces away, or at least do some split of remove parking and do convertible landscape parking if demand gets us there. So yeah, that's what I would propose. I would propose that backside being removed potentially.
Yeah.
And then, or half removed, half convertible. And then I would love to see, thank you for putting a map on screen, so I'm not gesturing wildly.
Yeah, just to clarify, so we know exactly what location, can you help me identify it?
Exactly. So on this, if we're thinking north, south, east, west, on the southern side there at the bottom, those line of spaces after the EV, nope, other way, down to this, yes, exactly, that line there. I think that is kind of the least essential, furthest from the retail locations. And then I think there's an area, some of these large areas in front of the Chick-fil-A. Yeah, exactly, that area. Not that one, but if we go down to some of those kind of middle sections, exactly. There's that large one, and if not that one, there's a smaller one there just to the right of that, that already has pretty significant landscaping wrapping it. If that could be a fully landscaped area, or maybe it would necessitate a slight redesign where some of that parking is kind of tilted 90 degrees to better match the parking in front of Chick-fil-A, and then you add more landscaping there. This is kind of, Andrew, I really appreciate you clarifying where we were on parking. For some reason, I had in my head we were 11 above minimum. But I did have problems with excessive parking on the site. I think there is some more leeway there to include some landscaping or something like that. So those are the areas that I would target at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, without getting, we'll let other committee members weigh in here.
Well, I was not, because I appreciate that you're spatially focused on where, and I would agree, those are great spots for it. I have a feeling staff's going to want to hear numbers though. So with that in mind, how many units does that end up totaling? Because I see the square that has now been highlighted for removal, but you highlighted about 2 areas now up top. Which ones would you prioritize?
We've got 17 spaces on that southern boundary that I believe you want removed. So I've got that count.
I think that would be easy, just to take that whole southern boundary and make that into landscaping and trees. That seems clean.
And then if we
But
consider that
that's
we're in-
not where your pedestrians are that need the shade. That's the furthest
Well-
away from any pedestrian traffic.
Where would the pedestrians be on the site? that you're
The
talking
pedestrians
about?
who are walking to the businesses from the parking lot under the shade trees.
And Mike, can we see
That's
the
the
tree
most
plan
remote
slide?
area of
It
any.
has the
Commissioners, may
trees on there
I
are-
offer something?
Yes.
We also have to keep in mind that there are employees that will be working in all 25,000 square feet of the building. They need a place to park. And generally, the spaces furthest away from the building are where you want your employees to park. And like I said, that entire panhandle, that's useless to us. So we only are working with that strip that you want to now take away. If I could appeal to you, making them convertible or making them like grass pavers so that they look green and adding some more landscaping between them, I would hope that that would maybe be a good alternative between removing them and having them be asphalt parking lot. And by the way, these other areas that are going to be water retention aren't asphalt. They're permeable pavers. We can also make them interlock blocks that actually have some greenness to them. So, I mean, it's not all asphalt. So we are really improving a lot of the stuff that's currently there. You know, I mean, right now it's just an asphalt deck, 2.5 acres wide with no drainage. So I hope that you can understand it. We're adding 100 trees. We're adding this drainage. We're doing a lot of stuff, trying to make it nice. Just sharing.
Appreciate that. Did you?
Too many cooks in the broth. Figure it out. I'll support.
I like the idea of more permeability, and if that could step in as, you know, this project's analog for the convertible parking that we liked at LabCon, maybe that's a good way of splitting the proverbial baby.
So ostensibly make that southern boundary there, those 17 spaces, into convertible, target those as our convertible landscape spaces, just to assent to the needs of the applicant here as well. And then in terms of tree canopy, I think we are adding a lot of tree canopy, and I know, Roger, you want to stay out of this now, but for areas where you think would be most vital as a landscape architect to add any potential canopy, if we were going to specifically remove any parking to add canopy, what areas would you think would be relevant to target?
Well, I think if you look at the plan, where there are planter islands that are, you know, where trees are planted, I think if you either expand some of them so they get a larger tree, or add a planter and, you know, take up one parking stall with one planter. But if you increase the number of trees that are in the pedestrian-friendly zone, you know, where the shade is most desirable. So I would just pick 3 or 4 or 5 places to infill a tree that's, you know, a missing area. I don't know how to refer to this plan, but if you look at the tenant shops on the western edge, okay, maybe there's a couple of stalls there that we could remove and plant on that frontage, and maybe there's one in the next planter that's east of the western edge. Maybe there's another. Maybe we can add a tree on that island that has no trees in it.
I see the one you're talking about. It follows almost the crosswalk there that moves toward Chick-fil-A and then goes west.
That's an important place to get a bigger tree. And maybe where the crosswalk crosses and joins, there's a walk in the middle of a planter. You could move that walk to one edge and plant a tree there. See what I mean? Right now, it's divided by that sidewalk, so you have 2 3-foot planters. You could move it 3 feet and have a 6-foot planter with a bigger tree.
Would you have to sacrifice any parking spaces on that?
No,
design
it's
change?
all done within that planter. The sidewalk moves 3 feet to the curb, and then you have the sidewalk width and then whatever's remaining in that planter to plant. So you have a larger planter zone where you can get a bigger tree.
So in the effort of making this a motion, could we target the area where Mike's cursor is for a slight redesign? I don't think we'd have to even sacrifice parking potentially to target, specifically add 1 tree there. So you'd be adding 94 trees to the site. And then create those 17 parking spaces on that southern boundary we identified as convertible landscaped spaces, and then I guess add the 4 ADA as well. Does that sound getting close to?
That's getting close to the numbers we're actually going to need. This resolves parking. This resolves a little bit of the landscaping, though I still assume you want to include working with the arborist.
I
overall.
think as arbitrary as percentages can be, I think like a 50% or 60% or above native, and the landscape architect may look at it and say, I can do, 100%. They may, sometimes folks get inspired and come up with something way better than I'm thinking.
We're going to go
of.
with 60%. You know why?
Okay.
Because we're here. We're just going to go
Okay,
with 60%.
let's ask for
An alternative to the crepe myrtle and the strawberry tree.
specifically targeting those. Yeah, I think that's good guidance. So 60% native, specifically targeting replacement of the strawberry and crepe myrtle. I mean, as beautiful as they are, I think for what we're trying to do in the city, I think that's a great one, a great change.
And then this covers landscaping, trees, parking, ADA accessibility, solar. We've talked a lot about solar, wanting to see that added. Is this something, going back to an earlier question, in a SPAR review, is solar something we can require as a condition, Andrew, or is that something we kind of have to just hope the applicant will add?
I think I want to ask Assistant City Attorney Brady to weigh in on if we have nexus to require
Thanks.
that.
Yes, I agree with Andrew's earlier interpretation about the nexus. Requiring solar goes more to the use, and this is the site plan. If you're able to be creative and say that the solar would, make the required SPAR findings, that could be possible. But without that, I think there is an issue with the nexus.
Got it. Can we, this is going to be a bit weaker then, but can we pivot then as a finding that we request the applicant work with staff to look at opportunities for increased solar, especially if there are opportunities to make that more affordable? I recognize the nexus issue, but at least that would be requiring a step in that direction.
Yeah, Chair, if I can throw in a couple more carrots, I'd offer that, in addition to the Infrastructure Act I referred to earlier that incentivized electric vehicle charging, the new Inflation Reduction Act offers at minimum a 30% tax credit for the installation of solar, and it can even be higher based on some other parameters that you can follow. And also the standing seam roof offers really the best mechanism for interface for a solar mounting system. So you have a lot of basis there to get a really good, successful solar installation that ultimately is going to save you money. So I think we can offer as many as many carrots as possible that are already out there available to you in the absence of being able to have any sticks to hold against them.
All right. With that in mind, are there any other conditions that we have not addressed so far? Anybody can remember? Okay. I don't want to propose that all of what has just been said be reread aloud. Oh, yes, Andrew.
I was just reviewing the no idling signage, but I wonder if we want that to go on
signage is gonna be
the master sign program, SPAR.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And Andrew, Mike, we did, section 11090 about the bike locks? Is that?
Oh, that's correct. Thank you. So we are going to add a condition requiring compliance with the city's section 11.0.
90.
Right, 090, which would then achieve the secured bicycle parking facilities in compliance with the ordinance.
Thank you.
There's also the condition that I had in my presentation about the contrasting crossing material on the pavement.
Mm-hmm.
Support that.
Me too. With all of those conditions in mind, do I have a motion to approve this SPAR specifically? the site plan SPAR with those conditions included.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it, and I know we don't want to read all of it back, but it'd be great if we could get some summary. I'm sure staff captured it all, but yes, I will second it, assuming it's everything we just talked about and delineated. Yes, a second.
I can make an effort, or Mike, Andrew, do you want to run?
I'll take a shot.
Okay, please.
Okay, so I have the increase or conversion to 12 ADA stalls from 8. The conversion of the 17 parking stalls at the southwestern portion of the site to convertible landscaped area. Adding a tree at the PED connection. There's an island sort of interior to the site that is, I have it identified, but it's the location that's nearest to the most buildings and also connecting to the walkway. Adding a tree in that island, specified on screen. Then I also have, can't read my own handwriting, but concrete.
I can pick up from there if you'd
So,
like.
yeah, I'll just, then I have the bike parking in compliance with 11090.
Okay.
I wrote, not to confuse anyone, I just won't read that last one. Then we also have potentially encouraging solar.
Sure. So then I also have shall utilize native tree species for 60% of all tree plantings, and shall reduce the overall number of strawberry trees and crepe myrtles from that proposed. Kind of broad, but I think that will help the landscape architect achieve a balance between native trees and then achieve a reduction in strawberry trees and crepe myrtles. Shall comply with bicycle facility requirements contained in IZO section 11.090. Shall use concrete pavement to differentiate the pedestrian pathway throughout the site parking lot. And then I think we don't, I think the solar power or the solar arrays would be consider?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we could consider implementing solar, what's the technical term? Solar generation? Okay. Implementing PV where available on rooftops or through carport structures?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I think that's 8 additional conditions then.
And to clearly not opposed to nitpicking, I would say 60% or more native, but that's terrific.
Well, we can add that. Thank you.
With that in mind, could we get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner McKeerling,
Yes.
Commissioner Rackison,
Yes.
Commissioner Wisman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Cater Thompson absent, Chair Hooper,
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 absent, motion carried.
Congratulations, everyone. We are now through one of 2 SPARs. And to the applicant team, I just want to say thank you for your patience tonight. Now we'll move into discussion of the actual sign master plan. And for this one, I'm just going to keep changing the order a bit. We'll start with Heidi.
I'm going to be easy. I'm actually okay with the signage. That's all.
Oh, that's great. Okay. I, for the most part, I agree with the conditions set forth by staff. I, in general, have a difficult time with freeway signs. I do agree that our ordinance on that front is poorly written and is at best vague. However, I do have issues with us populating our freeway too much, and I was fine with the original conditions that staff applied in the resolution. I'll leave it at that for now. Roger.
And I just want to be clear too, Chair, there's sort of two modifications that the applicants are requesting. It's the freeway signs as well as the existing monument sign. So, you might have a different opinion about either, but yeah, I think you're pretty clear there, Chair.
Yeah.
My only comment has been regarding the tenant signs, if there's a way to scale those down to be more in proportion to the small buildings and the, I don't know what to tell you because I don't know what the rules are in terms of signage square footage, but somehow it's a little smaller, possible.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, I'd be inclined to support the tenant's request for those modifications in order to encourage as much signage as possible for purposes of traffic flow and public safety in consideration of this site.
And I'd be generally supportive of what staff has put forth. I think the freeway oriented for me is less of a safety issue, and I also just think conformance to existing businesses along this corridor, and that also applies to the monument sign. We don't have monument signs there pointing people down Stony Point and Auto Center Drive, and I think the sign that, again, I see the larger sign that's already being proposed. I think that's sufficient to guide people there, the new sign that's proposed. So yeah, I'd agree with kind of what staff's put forward.
With that in mind, it seems like we have a fair bit of consensus around what staff has already put forward. Will someone please make the motion?
I'll move the SPAR as staff has written. That's excluding the freeway signs and excluding the monument sign.
I'll second. Hello? What's up?
Are we able to speak?
Oh, no, this is just the discussion time for us before we get to our vote. I apologize. Although, did we want to hear? We're already. Yeah.
It's your meeting, Chair, I would say.
We took public we took applicant comment in the other section, so feel free.
And I'll just mention real quick, my count is 2 favors, 2 noes, and Roger's just concerned about the tenant signs on the existing retail. So I don't know if we do have a consensus regarding those proposed modifications.
Fair enough.
Well, I'll support the modification. I'm just asking them to consider this.
No, okay.
So I did want to speak to the concerns first with the freeway signs. I understand staff's concerns, the commission's concerns. However, I think Commissioner Wishman, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is correct. One of the key factors is, when you're traveling down a freeway, if you can't see the sign to a business, people are hitting the brakes, people are, making quick lane changes. Oh, I missed that place. It is really important. These are small freeway signs. They're on a building. In any other municipality, they would typically be considered just a simple building sign. And the reason I bring that up, it's not something that we're asking for a large, giant pole sign on the side of the freeway or something like that. This is simply a sign on the side of the building. Just happens that that side of the building is oriented, faces the freeway. It's not even that it's oriented to it. So I'd like you to consider that. One of the reasons why we have to ask for it for a variance, again, the code is a little bit unclear, but we think it's really a critical component to this site to be able to have signage on that side of the building. The public really needs to know where they're going. And often that's missed as some of the concerns on a site. Regarding, of course, Commissioner McCurling, I hope I'm not butchering your name. Absolutely, your concerns are valid, but I think the city code really does address that. Again, every tenant will have to go through a separate sign permit to make sure that it does conform with the code. The sign program just governs what their restrictions are, and it is illustrated pretty plainly. But again, each individual tenant will need to submit their signage for a city permit. Any questions?
I'm hearing the public safety argument that you're making for freeway signs, and maybe this is just a difference in how people travel. I don't think I've gone anywhere in the last 10 years or so that involved a longer trip if I wasn't aware of what was already there that didn't involve Google Maps. So I guess I do have a question as to how much traffic is the sign on the side of a building, which is arguably not very big, really bringing in? And I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I just want to get like a real assessment of that.
Sure. It's generally, it's not as much about the traffic. More so, I like to compare it to if you're driving, down the freeway. You need fuel. You ever been in a situation where you go, gosh, I wish I knew where the fuel stations were. So it's just an awareness point. As you drive by the site, hey, I remember there's a fuel station there. Similarly, when I'm hungry, I'd like to stop and grab a bite. It's an awareness point. And it's really critical that, people know, hey, this is in my community. If all you do is travel down the freeway and that's not typically your off-ramp, that site doesn't exist.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'd like to. So I'm speaking on behalf of Chick-fil-A with respect to the concern on the signage. So signs equal sales. They really do. They always do. The marketing data is, indisputable.
Okay.
Chick-fil-A has made a number of compromises on their branding. For the example, this building is highly, contextualized for the area. The sign code that we're complying with is relatively onerous, and I think Petaluma's kind of proud of that fact. But it is a very essential component for our investment here. To not have any signage that orients so that people can know that we're here by coming by. Maybe they don't choose to buy a chicken sandwich today, but it does let them know that we're there. And so we've got people monitoring online, and very important, crucial. Please, it's just very, very important. Thank you.
All right. Andrew, I can see your...
Well, I appreciate the conversation. I think what Assistant City Attorney Brady and I have been working on is a process question about and there's a motion before the commission to approve the resolution as drafted. And so then would one of the commissioners then who's indicated that they would support the signage as proposed by the applicant, would they propose an amendment to the resolution as drafted to remove the conditions?
Oh, they'd have to.
That would require that the signage, that the freeway-oriented signage and the monument signage be removed. And then the person making the motion would have to accept that amendment, and then the commission would vote on the resolution that's before them. So we were thinking that's how that process would look.
And I would say in thinking about this and thinking what our other commissioners have said, for me, the only sticking point is that monument sign, only because if you're allowing that for this business, which again, I mean, not that it's Chick-fil-A's fault per se, but it's a bit contentious. It's not, the public's favorite. To make an exception in this example, I don't necessarily think is warranted. I understand it's a revenue driver, but again, we're not allowing other businesses to do this down those side streets. So I'd be inclined to amend my motion to make the modifications for freeway signage, which I think if they're black signs on this backdrop, I don't see it as something that aesthetically is destroying our freeways. So I would amend my motion that way, but I'm open to other commissioners' arguments, amendments. But I just think the monument sign for Cattleman's was kind of a vestige of the past. We are moving on, but I also don't want to make a new kind of stake in the ground that, yes, we brought Chick-fil-A in, they're allowed to do this signage, that we're not allowing other businesses on Auto Center Drive and Stony Point. So yeah, I guess I'll formally amend my motion to say, okay, allow the modification for freeway signage, and then that'll either die or other commissioners can change it.
It's just a question, don't we have a number of monument signs for the outlet and for the different shopping malls? Outlet has signs at both roads that go to it, and they also have a freeway sign.
Yeah, I think there are a number of monument signs for all the car dealerships along that Auto Center Drive or Parkway, whatever. So I don't see that as a derivation from what's already there.
Aren't the car dealerships, though, in their own specific planning area? Because that came up in the staff report. So I'm just wondering, this is not the same thing.
I think what Darren was referring to is a difference between what's already existing in terms of what is allowed in that area and what would be proposed in this area with the monument sign.
Right, but I'm going back to the planning documents that are guiding some of these areas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't the monument signs that exist for the auto row be specific to that planning area?
Well, right, that is correct, because they do have a master sign program for that PUD.
Yeah.
So,
Andrew, actually, it's just on the auto row portion. It's in the PCD that they have freeway signage, essentially by right through those specific, which I think was adopted in the early 90s. So it's not actually an MSP.
Oh, I see. So the question was, would that existing monument sign perhaps be related to auto row or governed by the auto row PCD?
Just if it's analogous to what's already on Petaluma Boulevard. If we already have monument signs, again, just from my memory, I'm not sure how many monument signs pepper Petaluma Boulevard there, but if we're saying, look, this isn't in conformance currently, and there aren't loads of other businesses that use those feeder roads to Petaluma Boulevard that have their signs out there lining Petaluma Boulevard, this would seem like an exception to allow for that. And it's a site that I think is already visible from Petaluma Boulevard, but it is tucked back in there. So I see the argument. So like I said, I'll amend my motion for the freeway part. And then if the rest of the committee wants to make a strong argument for the monument sign, we can make
And I would like to comment, earlier you had asked how many signs are on Petaluma Boulevard that would point to sort of off-site uses on Stony Point or on Auto Center. I did I use Google Street Views, and I didn't identify any signage that was on Petaluma Boulevard North that was not associated with uses fronting Petaluma Boulevard North.
I believe the applicant wants to give comment.
In the spirit of compromise and taking away things and making some things better, the applicant is willing to give up the battle for the monument sign that has a lot of gray areas and a lot of history that we don't know where to get the details from, as long as we can have the freeway facing two signs is all we're talking about. And that would be a wonderful compromise that we would love and support if that's something that would please the commission.
I just want to just be clear about the two signs facing the freeway that's on the building, right? It's kind of small.
It's just
and
the two.
not-
It's just the two things facing on those two new
Right.
buildings. It's just there.
Which
That's it.
I think we've allowed at like the Target Shopping Center
Yeah.
too, right? Yeah, which is a different situation, but still along the freeway, right?
Right, but Target would be a different situation because the
exactly.
tenant spaces
Yes,
are
yes.
exceeding 8,000 square
Yep,
feet, right?
got it.
So we would have The two new buildings, you're absolutely correct. We would have one sign on the Chick-fil-A building and one sign on the new Retail 3 building? Correct? Okay, thank you.
And I think that mirrors the motion I was trying to put forward.
And I'll just add real quick too, we will need some specific findings for that motion regarding removal of the condition, because we are doing a modification of this sign, master sign program, that requires 2 additional findings stated in 20.010. So that we believe the existing sign does not, or the freeway signs do not detract from the attractiveness and orderliness of the city's appearance, and that it protects the general welfare of the merchants and property owners in Petaluma. So if we can add that to the resolution, I think we're good.
And yeah, I would
That-
love to
I
see that
agree with
added.
that.
I think that gets to the heart of what we're, yeah.
Did we still need somebody to second the motion, or is it?
I believe we do need a second on the motion and then a vote, yes.
I'll second.
Can we get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner McKeerling,
Yeah.
Commissioner Rackison,
Yes.
Commissioner Wisman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kidder Thompson absent, Chair Hooper,
Yes.
5 votes in favor, 1 absent, motion carried.
And with that, we conclude the second item for the night. Thank you, everybody who was patient with us through all of that. We are going to take a 5-minute bathroom break at this time before we get to the next item. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, there was a whole thing about retail.
I had to bite my tongue when she. Hey, are we recording? I don't know why I'm banging the gavel for so few, but I'm doing it anyway. We are back in session. Now we're going to move on to our next item, which is a discussion with no intended motion, but a discussion to talk about the potential for ad hoc or subcommittees. And before we get into the discussion itself, I wanted to ask our Deputy City Attorney to go over some of the rules and procedures around that.
Sure. So the Brown Act recognizes two types of subcommittees. There's the standing committee as well as the ad hoc committee. The standing committee needs to comply with the Brown Act, and they either have a regular set time location or they have a continuous matter subject. So some evergreen topics, city council making sure that the public just has good morale. That could be a standing committee. Rather than like an ad hoc committee, which doesn't need to require or comply with the Brown Act, but they have a specific charge. So amending a certain zoning code chapter. And then as soon as that charge is done, the committee dissolves. So we include in all of our resolutions kind of what that specific charge is. And we try to have a date for when they need to complete that by. So zoning code amendment complete by X or date, and if not, then the committee dissolves on its own. Other things, the committees obviously need to be within the purview of the legislative body. So Planning Commission, you can't have a subcommittee that addresses senior concerns because that's for the senior committee. Other issues, it needs to be less than a quorum of the body. So here we have 7 members. Less than a quorum would be 3. I get quick math there. Other things, members of the public or other committees can't be members of the subcommittee, but they can participate as much as they want. And then there is sort of a standing order between the city manager and city clerk and city attorney that before subcommittees are made that they are aware so they can weigh in if there's staff resources. And that's what a city council wants. And then the last thing I do say is, okay, I already addressed subject matter jurisdiction, and that is stated for the Planning Commission in section 2.08020 of the Petaluma Municipal Code, where the Planning Commission's duties are located. So happy to answer any other questions.
Real quick, for ad hoc committees with a defined goal and end date, can members of the public and other committees be members of those committees?
So they can't be members, but they can participate as much as you want. You can say, hey, we're going to have a
join the
meeting at Crooked Goat or Starbucks. Please come and participate. Here's a draft of this ordinance amendment. Please weigh in.
All right. Okay. Fair distinction.
No, I have a question. Are those meetings noticed?
So for ad hoc committees, they are not. But if it was a standing committee, and again, standing committees are either have a regular date and time or an evergreen charge, those would need to comply with the Brown Act. So 72 hours of notice. Those meetings would require a general public comment. I don't know if the city currently has any standing bodies. I know city council doesn't, so I think that would be a first, and we would definitely recommend ad hoc because you don't need to do that noticing.
Before we get into the actual discussion of possible uses, are there other questions from commissioners?
The purpose of this discussion is to find out if there's ad hoc committees we want to develop under the Planning Commission.
Absolutely.
Subjects of that.
Right. It's mainly to talk about where we might want to go, what ad hoc committees we might want to put together. We're not going to vote on that today. We'd then come back in another meeting to actually look at a specific proposal and vote on it.
Correct.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just not used to there not being more questions. With this in mind, I'm going to kick off the discussion because when I proposed this item, I had a committee in mind already. I just didn't want to start the discussion too restrictive because I'm sure there are other ideas folks have had for this. But I think, and I don't think it's a staff problem, and I don't think it's an intentional problem by anyone who's been involved in kind of our planning process historically. So I just want to make that clear. I think because of how complicated all of this can be and how overworked everyone is, we do have a bit of a communications issue. What I would like to propose as one of the uses that we could apply this to is building out an ad hoc committee, give it, say, about 6 months of time, to build out recommendations that could then help staff. And I don't just mean telling staff, hey, do this, and then we're adding to their plate. I mean building out recommendations that they can easily grab and use, such as how we do more simplified agendas for members of the public who don't have any background in this and might need a link to SPAR, for example, or a link to that reference code so they can just click on it and go, that sort of thing. Reusable explainers that can be thrown into some of these documents so that it's not, again, having to rewrite everything, but it's something they can grab and put in when referencing things so that whether it's emailed or put in a document or put on an agenda, folks feel they have an easy time accessing those definitions. Things like building out repeatable timeline charts. People love visuals, actually breaking out, this is generally speaking what a project timeline looks like, this is generally speaking what something more complicated might look like, et cetera. I think our project web pages need work. They're great for us, and they're great for folks who are actually following the project, maybe because they're involved or maybe because they have a position on it. I have gotten more than my fair share of feedback that they're not great for anybody else. And so I think when we have folks now who are coming in on some of these projects and they have charged feelings, and so they want to go to these web pages to get answers, but maybe it's a little too complicated or it's not laid out efficiently enough, they then feel like our overabundance of information has been designed to misguide them or mislead them. So I think these are examples, and there's more things I've kind of come up with on the list, but like, for example, I think we could build out, we do this in the legislature all the time, standardized social media toolkit. So offices, in this case, it'd be one office, can very easily go, oh, here's the template for this project's coming up. We always say this, we always say that. This is the context and the link, that sort of thing. I think a communications ad hoc committee would also have the advantage of we can work with staff, build out these products, because I would like it to be products that staff can actually make use of, that we can make use of. We can involve the rest of the community. We can even, we can involve organizations like Know Before You Grow. We can involve other community groups that might be more skeptical that can then come in and help with the process. And then in the process of helping us communicate better, really start to see what's happening behind the scenes and understand where the kind of roadblocks are. And we can build out that engagement that way so that at the end of our kind of 6-month window, it might just be 2 commissioners, but we've brought in a lot more people to help, who are then going to be people who can very easily answer questions to the public when things come up as well. So I think it'll have 2 benefits. That's where I wanted to start this off, but I'm not trying to monopolize the whole discussion around that. So I'll start there. Who would like to go next?
Just riffing on that idea quickly, when I first joined planning, I had asked, to Dylan's point, if, could I do a planning commissioner, come tell me what you think, kind of call out to people, yeah, come to Crooked Goat, come to Lagunitas, here's a projector, here's the project we have coming up, John Public, tell me what you think without the formality in 3 minutes and everything else, just tell me directly, I can't say my opinion. How does this kind of fit into gatherings like that? How would we be restricted, or what we have to think about with that?
Sure. So I think the difference there is when you have kind of a public give your input on a specific item, maybe the rest of the commission doesn't hear the same thing. and we want a record that shows all of the considerations that went into the Planning Commission's determinations in case it is challenged. But here, how I picture it is you can have that public engagement and then maybe come back, every month or so. We can have a line item here once a month, just an update sort of on where we are on those recommendations. So, yeah.
Okay. I like this idea.
And I would say too, I know Andrew and our planning staff are pretty receptive too. So maybe, a committee is not even necessary, but just sort of a, hey, these are ways that we can improve sort of thing. Andrew, was that? Yeah.
Sure. I think that what appeals to me about this idea is that you're bringing forward to us recommendations on how we communicate from the other perspective. I mean, it's oftentimes for us, we're used to just the volumes of very technical information, and we're immersed in it daily. And I know that there's times where we've tried to simplify and make communications or make information more accessible, and we've still missed the target. And so I think it is helpful to have that other lens and have those recommendations. So I do find that an appealing aspect of what you're proposing.
Thank you. And I will say, part of where I'm stealing this model from, PBAC, they've had a number of ad hoc committees to get specific projects done. They haven't been perfect. They've had funny segues at points, but by and large, it really empowered PBAC and its membership to not just be saying, hey, when are we going to get this update? When are we going to get this update? Instead, it allowed PBAC to take part in those things that might have been delayed quite a long time because staff resources are limited. Part of why I'm proposing communications, and I didn't get into looking at specific zoning code or specific ordinances, is I know we have objective standards coming up. I have a feeling once we've seen that and gone through that, we'll then have a clearer picture of where our holes are. I also think having an ad hoc committee specifically about plugging those gaps brings up questions as to how we're still helpful and not getting in the way, given expertise we don't have in that regard. But I thought this would be a good place for us to start doing things that we can help bring to you to use, as opposed to telling you just do more and you already don't have time to do what you have to do now.
Well, we greatly appreciate that, because it certainly is a capacity issue. And I think from the perspective of, the city manager, city clerk, and city attorney review and approval of the establishment of an ad hoc committee being required, it is because capacity to perform, and also to be able to perform to expectations that are established. So I think to have the models is great. One thing that sometimes will happen is you'll have a model, but then and you push it out, and then in response you'll get 5 requests for modifications. And so I think to be able to have some sort of tested and clearly articulated models that are very conscious of capacity to execute are very important to us and would be beneficial.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there any other ad hoc ideas that folks wanted to float for this? I've essentially monopolized it into talking about communications, but that was the idea I came with. So
I think it's a good place to start. I think this is, we can do it like, beta or proof of concept. How does this work before we go into having, 5 or 10 of them, Like, one is a good place to start.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very worthwhile objective. Anything that communicates better with the public and allows them to feel more engaged, and also lends transparency to our operations, what we do, provide that full feedback loop. So I'd definitely be supportive of it. I think it's a good idea, Chair.
Great. Well, thank you. This item doesn't have a vote, but I think it's fair to say that we'd like to bring this back for the next meeting to actually vote on creating a communications ad hoc.
Sure, and Chair, I'd love to get some public comment on this item before we
Fair
move on.
point.
Thank you.
I'm going to open public comment now. If anybody would like to come up and give their card to the clerk. I mean, you'll have to do a card after the fact for our records.
Yeah, big fan. Communications are super important. I think the internet is a scary place where a lot of people don't understand what's going on. And I know for me, just having gone to this commission and others in city council over the last 5-6 months, I'm just barely getting my head around how it all works. So to the extent that the Planning Commission, which obviously has a lot of eyes on it, can be more forthcoming in those explainers, I think would be really valuable.
Thank you. Well, with that, this item is closed. I am glad. I don't know why. I kept expecting something was going to happen. Anyway, we'll move on to, I believe we're at staff comment at this point. Or am I out of order? Oh,
Commission comment.
Commissioner comment. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We will just go in order. Rick?
Oh, on this matter?
Oh, no, it's just any commissioner comment.
Nothing to report out.
I'll just report out briefly from PBAC, liaison to PBAC. PBAC reviewed at the one meeting I've had since planning. We reviewed a Smart Trail signage program, kind of a unified signage program along the Smart Trail in Marin, Sonoma. That was interesting. And then we saw a draft from Fair and Piers of our active transportation plan, namely vision and goals for active transportation in Petaluma. I think it was a consensus for myself and other committee members that we were missing some core components that we wanted to see there, and we voted to form an ad hoc to work with Bjorn, staff member for PBAC, to create or to craft different vision and goals for the active transportation plan. We've already had some meetings there and made some good progress.
Oh, great, thank you. Heidi?
No, I have none.
I also don't have any comments.
The tree committee has not met, so there's no progress. The ad hoc committee is working on trying to get more involvement in city street projects with trees, and we're also trying to get a kind of a special ghost tree project where we're trying to replant trees that have been removed over time. And I should say that last week there was an article in the local Agus Courier regarding all the street projects that the city is doing with the detail engineering accomplishment of what they hope to accomplish. And not one tree was mentioned in 7 or 8 different street projects. So somehow we got to get this focused more on public works and street trees have to somehow be engaged together. And I don't know how the tree committee and the ad hoc committee is doing our own thing, but somehow there needs to be a bigger picture of what role trees and shade and temperature and all that stuff plays. And maybe it comes from the general plan, maybe it comes from policy in the general plan, I don't know. But I would like the planning commission to be more engaged in it.
Fair enough. Well, with that, we are done with commissioner comment, and now we move on to staff. Andrew?
Great, thank you, Chair. So let's see, to begin, staff had been drafting a senior mobile home overlay district for administrative review. We are scheduling a neighborhood meeting at the Petaluma Community Center on September 7th, and public notice will go out about that at the end of this week. I think we have to, it has to hit mailboxes by Monday, August 28th. So more information on that, but you can anticipate that a proposed overlay will be coming before you in the near future. Then second, objective design standards. We are finalizing those, conducting final review of the administrative draft. The immediate next steps, once the administrative draft is completed, that will be published for both stakeholder and public review. We're looking at a community meeting opportunity and then anticipating agendizing that for a planning commission study session on October 10th. So I'm glad that we're finally starting to narrow in on a date for that first study session with the commission. The third thing, Olivia Irvin just, in response to a discussion about VMT and VMT analysis, she told me this evening that she is currently reviewing updates to the guidelines and that she believes that the proposed updates will come before the commission yet this fall. So we'll have some detailed discussion on that. And then also we're continuing to work on bringing staff together to develop sort of a review of the Riverfront Master Plan to understand where it's at and what remains in terms of implementation, as well as the potential for the interplay and interaction with the Caulfield Bridge extension design. So I think we'll be able to hopefully bring that to you to the second meeting in September. Then the last two great bits of news, the downtown parking study was funded by MTC, and we're working now on scoping that, and then we'll work with MTC to identify the consultant process to move that study forward. But that has been the holdup on the downtown parking study, was we did need the funding in order to pick it back up again and move it forward. So that's been done. Also, MTC announced that the city has been awarded funding to begin preparation of the Corona Station Priority Development Area Specific Plan. That will be a multi-year planning effort. And I believe the scope is due to MTC for review by the end of September. So we'll be moving forward towards the end of the year, getting that funded project ready then to move to the first steps. So great news there. And then I think I do want to confirm that we will have a commission meeting on September 12th, and we do anticipate meeting on September 26th. Then as we start to roll into October and November, I'm confident that those agendas are going to merge and be populated. We do have a variety of required amendments to the zoning ordinance to comply with state law that we need to bring forward, as well as some development projects that we believe will be ready by the year's end. So you can count on it, I believe, at least up to Thanksgiving. You'll have much to be thankful for. Sure. Sure. Right. I believe we'll be able to achieve a quorum based upon what I know now, so let's talk offline and see.
Yeah, or if I could look at stuff earlier or something.
Sure. Okay, great. We'll coordinate offline as best we can. Thank you. And any other questions? Sure.
I have a question just based on tonight's meeting with the applicant that, we were talking about solar, and I know that we couldn't really require that. So what is the path to being able to require that legally?
Dylan, if you have some immediate thoughts, go for it.
I know, I would think that would just require either an amendment to our building code, which we are able to amend. The city adopts the California Building Code, but we can add local amendments based on our topography, geography, and climate. And we typically do those in December. So I don't know if adding solar is one of the topics, but we can talk to Rana Frank, who is the climate manager, I believe her position is, on potentially adding that. And if we're not able to add it through the California Building Code local amendments process, I think that would just be a standard that we could amend to our zoning code. So how I like to look at amendments is, let's find an example from another jurisdiction that has already done it, already successful, and if it potentially works somewhere else, then maybe can work with Petaluma. We might want to Petalumize it, make it a little stronger for the next person to steal or city to steal. But that's, I think, is the process.
Okay, well, I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole commission, but other commissioners, if you're in favor of them looking into that, I don't want to be the only one, but I think from what I heard earlier, I think it is, yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Save
This comes
your
up
knowledge.
meeting after meeting.
Exactly, okay.
Definitely
So
supportive.
Yeah, I think we might be swimming with the tide there because I believe that the California Building Code is going to adopt a mandate for commercial as they've had in the last couple of years for residential. I'm pretty sure that's coming down the line for next year, 2024.
Nice.
So that would be an appropriate first place to start.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that, okay.
Thank you.
And when would we realistically be able to get an update on what that looks like?
I should add too, I think that's one reason why we have a city council member who is the liaison, because then she can report that back to city council and says, hey, the planning commission brought up this idea to look at solar, and then hopefully council can prioritize it as one of their top 10 goals. I know that is theoretically how the city staff should be working on their items. Obviously, things come up. The other way is, and kind of open up the closet and or the sausage factory is, but once a week we have agenda review where staff kind of talk about what the next city council meetings are. So that could be a good place for this city to talk to our city manager and say, hey, this was brought up during planning commission. And then the city manager is able to talk to the city council and see if that's something they're interested. And if so, then that's our direction and we work on it.
I support that, thank you. Okay.
And I have no doubt that the vice mayor will either be watching this tonight or later, but either way, I'm sure we can all report back to our council liaison that this was a priority of ours as well. Well, with that, I believe we're ready to adjourn. If there's nothing else, have a good night, everyone.